Chapter 433. GOR Chapter 411 Target, 7,000 words. Shea observed all the actions of this beautiful woman. However, on the surface, he appeared indifferent. This hunting activity was not very interesting. After all, for Shea, he was not an aristocrat, so he would not be like those aristocrats, who would treat this activity as entertainment during their leisure time. For him, hunting was simply a job, a skill to make a living. Although there were not many prey in this forest, Shea still managed to successfully catch a few rabbits with the traps and traps that he made. Good luck seemed to have descended upon Shea once again. Inside one of the traps, he caught a fat fox. This was a fox with fiery red fur. The fox's fur was clearly of high quality, and its tail was fluffy and soft. When Shea caught it, the animal was still trying its best to bite the rope around its feet. Moreover, it had already bitten off half of the rope. Shea smiled as he caught the fox. With just a glance, he could tell that this was a female fox. Additionally, its fat body was not because it was fat. Rather, it was because it was pregnant. As Shea was hesitating, the soft voice of the governor's wife came from behind. Let it go. This woman's voice, at this moment, seemed to carry traces of gentleness and sadness. Shea's heart skipped a beat as he suddenly recalled something. With a smile, he untied the rope around the fox's feet and handed it over to the governor's wife. The governor's wife accepted it, her eyes revealing traces of gentleness. She held the fox in her arms and gently stroked it for a while. The fox was originally irritable and nervous. However, after being gently stroked by the governor's wife a few times, it suddenly became much more docile. The woman finally gave a faint sigh. She bent down and placed the fox beside the grass. The animal raised its head and glanced at the governor's wife before turning around and disappearing into the grass. Shea narrowed his eyes as he sized up the woman. When she turned her head back, Shea quickly shifted his gaze away. "Don't you think this is ridiculous?" The governor's wife looked at Shea. "Well, it's still a life after all," Shea said calmly. The governor's wife shook her head. "That's definitely not what you're thinking. You've heard about me, haven't you?" Shea: "Well, I haven't been able to give birth to a child, so when I saw this pregnant fox just now, my heart softened and I couldn't bear to kill it. You must be thinking this in your heart, right? Don't deny it." "I didn't deny it." Shea touched his nose. "I just didn't expect that the famous legend's wife would have such a soft-hearted side." The governor's wife seemed to smile, and her tone was somewhat unpredictable. "Everyone has a soft spot in their heart, but you just happened to discover my weakness today. Marshal Shea, what about you? You made your name on the battlefield. For a general like you, it is only natural that you would have a fierce temperament. So, who is the soft spot in your heart reserved for?" When she said that, Shea's heart skipped a beat. He was unable to stop himself from imagining a scene. In the vast red plains of the Wildfire Plains, he held an axe in one hand and a shield in the other, a beautiful girl with long legs sitting on his shoulders. Seeing the gentle look on Shea's face, the governor's wife smiled. "You must be thinking about your fiancé, right?" "That's right." Shea nodded, not intending to hide it. Their discussion of this topic caused the originally cold atmosphere to become much warmer. The two of them smiled in relief. At that moment, however, the sound of horse hooves could be heard coming from outside the forest. Then, the loud shouts of the guards could be heard. Hearing the sound, the governor's wife furrowed her brows. Then, a guard ran in with large strides and bowed to the governor's wife. He said in a low voice, "Madam, that." As he spoke, he looked at Shea. The governor's wife smiled. "There is nothing to hide. Sir Shea is my friend. If there is anything, just say it." The guard was stunned. He straightened his body and said loudly, "Sir Lear is coming. He is outside the forest." He said, hearing the name Lear, the governor's wife's frown deepened. Just as she was about to say something, she heard a burst of laughter coming from outside the forest. Following the laughter, a figure walked in with large strides. Behind him were several guards who tried to stop him. Ha 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 ha, what is it? I am just here to see my dear aunt. Can't I do that? The person who walked in had a tall and straight figure. He was wearing a hunting suit, which outlined his strong body and made him look particularly valiant. He walked in with large strides and laughed heartily. Dear aunt, hunting is such an interesting thing. Why didn't you call me along? You should know that when I was young, I loved to go hunting with my uncle. The man strode into the forest and stood in front of Xia and the governor's wife. He first saluted the governor's wife and then nodded to Xia with a smile on his face. You must be Sir Xia Laming. I heard that the Honorable Marshal had come to Husker City, but I didn't come to greet you until now. I've really made you laugh at me. To be able to meet someone who defeated Hastings on the battlefield is something I have always dreamed of. Aunt, I have to complain about this. Sir Xia is such a heroic figure. Why didn't you tell me about it? Xia narrowed his eyes as he regarded the man before him. The man appeared to be in his 20s, no older than 30. He was tall with broad shoulders and a narrow waist. His hunting suit gave him a very heroic appearance. His brown hair had clearly been carefully combed. His chin was a little too sharp for a man, but the long sideburns on both sides of his face concealed this shortcoming well. His facial features were very regular and even gave off a delicate feeling. However, his pair of eyebrows were raised upwards, giving him a more valiant appearance. His eyes were bright and he walked with large strides. His voice was also full of energy, revealing a very spirited appearance. From the respectful and vigilant manner of the governor's wife's guards behind him, this person's identity was clearly somewhat special. When this person walked in front of them, the governor's wife's eyebrows immediately relaxed. Her originally frown instantly turned into a warm smile. She raised her hand to cover her mouth and smiled. Lear, you are still so unruly. Last night you went out to patrol the city, so I didn't have time to inform you. I didn't expect you to be so well informed. Sir Xia is our honored guest, but his visit this time is confidential. I didn't expect you to receive the news as soon as you came back. After saying that, she looked at Xia and smiled. Mr. Xia, this is my husband's nephew, General Yuri, another outstanding young talent of the Yuri family. He is now the commander of Husker City's defense in the Besta military district. Governor Yuri's nephew? Xia's eyes suddenly lit up. After thinking of something, his face immediately revealed a warm smile. He walked up and looked at this guy's outstretched hand. However, he didn't reach out to shake the other party's hand. Instead, he hugged the other party. After a warm hug, Xia let go of the other party and smiled. I'm not a hero. I just had some luck on the battlefield. General Yuri, you don't have to be so polite. Please just call me Lear. General or whatever, I'm really making a fool of myself. In front of a famous general like you, I'm really ashamed. This Lear couldn't help but laugh. Sir Xia really doesn't shed his straightforward nature as a soldier. Tonight, I must drink with you. Haha, dear aunt, I'm borrowing your honored guest for a night. I'm sure you won't object, right? The governor's wife beamed with joy. Of course not. Why would I stop you men from drinking? I was just worried that a woman like me wouldn't be able to properly entertain Sir Xia. Then it's settled. Lear put his arm around Xia's shoulder and deliberately looked at him with a "we're all men" look. He lowered his voice and laughed. Although Husker City is a military town, there are still some places in the city where you can find fun. Haha, Sir Xia, my aunt can't entertain you in those places. Tonight, let me take you to experience the colorful activities of Husker City. Ha ha ha. This guy looked cheerful and amiable. He turned to look at the guard next to him and saw the rabbit and other prey in the guard's hands. He deliberately frowned and smiled. It seems that I'm done here. You've already gotten so much prey. Ha ha. Aunt, the next time there's such an interesting hunting activity, Remember to tell me. I still want to ask the famous Marshal Shea for advice on archery. Murderous intent. Amidst the seemingly warm laughter, Shea could clearly feel a hidden murderous intent and hostility. Although the governor's wife and Lear were smiling as brightly as the sun, when their eyes met, Shea could clearly feel a series of sparks. It seems the Besta military district isn't a monolithic block, Shea secretly thought. This was a very valuable discovery. With the addition of Lear, the following hunt became very interesting. Shea smiled as he looked at Lear and the governor's wife singing the same tune. Both of them were very eloquent. When they spoke, their words flowed like a river, speaking with fervor and assurance. The atmosphere looked very lively. It wasn't until the sun was about to set that the governor's wife deliberately yawned. She looked at the sky and smiled. Time really flies. Lear, you still have the task of patrolling the city tonight, right? Lear was startled for a moment before smiling. That's right. Military affairs can't be delayed. Besides, this is in front of Sir Shea. I can't embarrass myself too much. After saying that, he deliberately winked at Shea. Then it's settled. I'll go patrol the city first. Before dinner, I'll go to your residence to pick you up, hee. Then, we'll have to drink all night. The three of them had already walked out of the forest. The guards immediately brought their horses over. Lear took the lead to mount the horse. His movements were free and vigorous, revealing his extraordinary horsemanship. Sitting on the horse, his back was as straight as a javelin. With his head held high and his chest puffed out, he said with a smile, "Aunt Sir Shea, I'll take my leave first, see you tonight." He turned his horse around, whipped it, and galloped towards Husk City with his own guards. When the dust gradually settled, the smile on the governor's wife's face gradually disappeared. She turned her head and coldly looked at the guards beside her. Her tone instantly became cold. How did the news reach him? The guards by his side immediately acted as if they were facing a great enemy. They all stood up straight and lowered their heads in fear. It seems the news spreads very quickly. The governor's wife deliberately played with her slender fingers and said indifferently, "It's only been a day. How did Lear know? Last night, he was still 100 li away from here. It must have been hard for him to rush back here. He even had time to change into a hunting outfit before coming to see me." Seeing her guards lowering their heads in silence, the governor's wife took a deep breath and said indifferently, "All right, let's return to the city." After Shea and the governor's wife got on their horses, they slowly made their way back to Husk City under the escort of the cavalrymen. The cavalrymen did not move quickly. After traveling for a long distance, the governor's wife remained silent, a stark contrast to her previous cheerful demeanor. Since she did not say anything, Shea, who was riding beside her, also remained silent. When the walls of Husk City gradually became clear before their eyes, the governor's wife suddenly sneered. Then, she pulled on the reins of her horse. When she stopped, the surrounding guards naturally stopped as well. "Sir Shea." The governor's wife looked at Shea from behind. Shea stopped his horse and turned it around to look at the woman with a smile. "You saw it just now. I believe you must be waiting for me to say something to you, right?" Shea smiled calmly. "That's right. I was just wondering when you would talk to me about this matter. I didn't expect you to come clean with me so quickly. You and I are both smart people. I don't like to beat around the bush when talking to smart people." The woman's gaze was very straightforward. "Sir Shea, this Lear is my husband's nephew. Moreover, I have to say that he is the only male among the younger generation of the Yuri family. I'm sure you understand what I'm trying to say, right?" Shea nodded. The governor's wife swept her gaze across the surroundings. The cavalrymen beside her immediately understood and immediately moved away. They widened the perimeter and stood far away to wait. The governor's wife sat on her horse and looked at the walls of Husk City not far away. She said indifferently, "Husk City is an important military town. This place can directly maintain its deterrence to the north. Ever since we took over this place, 2 regiments of soldiers have been stationed here. The general in charge of these 2 regiments is Lear, my husband's only nephew. Shea deliberately smiled, and then looked at the governor's wife with an undisguised expression and said with a smile, "Is this a kind of compromise?" The governor's wife was startled. She didn't expect Shea to be so straightforward. But then the woman smiled and said, "Yes, this is indeed a kind of compromise. Many of the old officials still support Lear. At least from the current situation, he is the only choice in some people's hearts. You should understand what I mean. These problems are getting sharper as Governor Yuri gets older, isn't it?" Shea smiled faintly. The problem of the successor has always been the most important matter in any family. I can fully understand your current difficulties. The governor's wife stared at Shea with bright eyes. Shea didn't hesitate to look back at her. After a while, the woman suddenly said, "I am a selfish person, or rather, I have some selfish thoughts. Everyone has it." Shea nodded and said, "I have never believed that there is a saint in this world who only knows how to contribute and never think about themselves. To be frank, even if such a person does exist, respected governor's wife, you are not that kind of person. He. I am not one." The woman admitted without hesitation. Then, her voice turned gloomy. "I am only 26 years old this year. I married my husband when I was 16 years old. 2 years after our wedding, his health began to deteriorate. When he was dealing with official business, I began to help him from the side. This situation lasted for a full 2 years. It can be said that after other women got married, they were enjoying delicious food, riding horses, learning flower art, tea ceremony, or drinking afternoon tea with their close friends, enjoying leisure time under the sun. However, I was sitting in the study looking at piles of official documents and all kinds of official and military documents. When other women were hesitating about which spices to choose to dress themselves up, I was covered in the smell of ink and parchment paper. When other women were thinking about how to cook delicious food to please their husbands, I was thinking about how to transport the army's salary and supplies, and how to rob Peter to pay Paul when there was a shortage of food. When other women were chatting with their friends, I was painstakingly scheming against the allies and enemies around me. Other women could sleep until the sun shines on the balcony every day, but I had to get up before the sun came out. I have contributed almost everything I have to this military region, this family. Not because I am selfless, not because I am a saint. So, after putting in so much effort, you might not know, but since I was 24 years old, I have white hair. I am not a selfless person, and I am not a saint. After I have given so much, I will not give away the things that I have given so much to just anyone. Even if that person is my husband's nephew. Even if that person is the successor that those stubborn old officials have decided on. I can say without any modesty that the reason the Besta military district is where it is today is because of me. I won't let anyone take it away from me so easily." Shea was silent for a while, and then said with a bitter smile, "You can consider having a child, and then when your child grows up, he or she can inherit your business. I have also thought about this problem." The governor's wife's tone became a lot more gloomy. "I have imagined this scene countless times, giving birth to a child for my husband to inherit our bloodline. Then I will continue to contribute my energy to the Besta military region. 20 or 30 years later, when my child grows up, when I become old, when my eyesight starts to deteriorate, when my thoughts are no longer clear, when my ears start to turn deaf, I will give my heart's blood to my child, and let him carry it forward. But all of this, I will not give it to an outsider. Even if that person is also a member of the Yuri family, even if that person is the only male descendant of the Yuri family." It had to be said that this woman's words were a bit selfish. At least she placed her position above the family. But this selfishness made Shea have to admit that she was at least very frank. Perhaps, for many of the old officials of the Besta family, they didn't care how much this woman had sacrificed for this business. The only thing they cared about was that this business must be inherited by a male descendant surnamed Yuri. In the eyes of these people, no matter how well this governor's wife did, she was only a temporary custodian. Shea smiled. He looked at the governor's wife and said softly, "I think it hasn't been long since this General Lear became the choice of those stubborn old fellows. Oh, forgive me for being presumptuous, but I think it must be because you and Governor Yuri haven't been able to raise any offspring in the past 2 years that General Lear became the choice of some people to support. Then I believe that with your many years of operation in the Besta military region, it shouldn't be difficult to deal with this new guy." The governor's wife Wu Rant's expression changed. She looked coldly at Shea and said, "You mean, to get rid of a potential threat?" Shea said calmly, "I believe that you are not a soft-hearted person." "Of course I am not." The governor's wife suddenly smiled. Under this smile, her eyes were sharp. After that, she slowly said, Lear was able to become the commander of Husk City and control 2 emblem groups of soldiers because those old fellows tried their best to fight for some capital for him. Humph! But without my approval, he definitely wouldn't be able to stand in his current position. To put it bluntly, I can indeed make this threat disappear. I can make it disappear completely and wipe it out. However, this would also affect me. After all, in the hearts of those old fellows who are full of orthodox ideas, no matter how hard a woman works, she is still just a woman. In their hearts, a man with the surname Yuri is more important than anything else. Even if this person is mediocre, they will still be willing to support him to the position of governor and not choose a woman. Shea smiled and continued the governor's wife's words. "So, you also have concerns. After all, at this stage, you still have to maintain the internal unity of the Besta military region, at least on the surface. I'm afraid that the time for a coup or a purge has not come yet. You will continue to tolerate and even make some concessions to appease those old fellows." The conversation ended here. Although Shea didn't make any promises to the governor's wife, such as, "I promise to stand in your camp," or "Our army will only recognize the Besta military district that you lead as our only ally," he didn't say anything. But at the end of the conversation, Shea and the governor's wife just looked at each other and smiled before ending the conversation. After returning to the city, Shea returned to his residence, took a bath and changed his clothes. Then he quietly waited for the agreed meeting with General Lear in the evening. After sending the servants away, Shea sat alone in the room to rest. Dora's voice sounded in his mind, "You choose to ally with this woman?" "I choose to ally with the Besta military region." Shea smiled. "And this woman is the leader of the Besta military region. So, your words are not wrong. I think this woman is a little scary. That Lear might be easier to control." Dora's voice was somewhat unpredictable. Shea smiled. "Dora, are you testing me again? If I say something stupid, then you can take the opportunity to mock me and mock me." I said, "We always play this kind of game. I'm tired of it." Dora smiled. The female dragon's tone was somewhat malicious. "Looks like you're going to show your smart side this time, which is a rare sight. I'm not a fool, okay?" Shea touched his chin. This woman still has some reservations about what she said today. It's clear that although this Lear is a threat to her, she hasn't gotten rid of this threat. It's not just because she wants to appease those old officials. What a joke. She has been running the Besta military region for 7 or 8 years. From what I've seen of this woman's wisdom and methods, the foundation she's built over the past 7 or 8 years is enough to suppress some of the old officials. I think, for such a powerful person like her to keep Lear, who openly threatens her rule, by her side, there must be other reasons. I'm not stupid enough to ally with that Lear." "Oh? Your idea is—" "It's very simple." Shea's eyes flashed at this moment like a cunning fox. If I were a leader, I would be worried that there might be people in my group who have second thoughts, who are dissatisfied with me, or who have rebellious intentions. In such a situation, how would I purge the internal department? Send people to secretly investigate? Invest a lot of manpower and resources to investigate the internal department? Not to mention how much effort this kind of action would take, the results might not be good. Moreover, this kind of internal investigation would often arouse disgust, especially for those who were originally very loyal to me. When faced with this kind of investigation, they would instead resent it. If I'm very loyal to someone, but the other party shows that they don't trust me, if it's me, I would also be dissatisfied. So, speaking up to this point, Shea deliberately paused. He stroked his chin and continued to sneer. Therefore, doing an investigation is something that only the most stupid people would do. If you want to catch those fish hidden underwater, it would be too troublesome to catch them one by one. Why not? Just set up a target for yourself. Set up an enemy. With such an enemy openly standing on the opposite side, and, at least on the surface, this guy seems to have some chance of winning, and even has some advantage. Then, those big fish that were originally hiding in the water to oppose me will come out of the water one by one and gather around this target to oppose me. This method is really smart. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 434. GOR Chapter 412 Growth. Actually, there's another reason. Later in the evening, the one sitting in front of Shea was General Lear. Lear? Yuri? After drinking a barrel of good wine together, Shea had to admit that Lear was really something. Even Shea had to admit that this guy was becoming more and more pleasing to the eye. This Lear seemed to have more substance than Shea had expected. This guy seemed to know more about wine than any of the drunkards in Wildfire Town that Shea had met before. Tonight, Lear had even taught Shea how to use a little honey and some special ingredients to mix into the wine, making the wine taste even more mellow and endlessly memorable. Tonight's meeting with Lear was not as boring as Shea had originally expected, nor was it filled with scheming between those who were wooed and those who were wooed. The meeting was unexpectedly relaxed and interesting. Lear took Shea to a very dirty-looking tavern in Husker City. The tavern served the best wine in Husker City. Of course, there were also women there. This Lear did not seem to be as pretentious as he was during the day. Instead, he seemed to be a different person. He spoke loudly to Shea. The two men drank together and shouted. They even casually made some jokes in the army and used foul language. When they drank to their heart's content, Lear even jumped on the table and did a tap dance. Then, he shared with Shea the 11 ways to drink wine that he had researched. One of them was to do a handstand in the corner and slowly drink a large glass of wine. At the same time, the wine would not spurt out from the nose. This tavern was obviously frequented by many officers of the garrison army. Then, the two men participated in a small gambling game organized by other officers. More than a dozen men gathered around a table, whistling, slamming the table, throwing dice, gulping down wine, laughing and cursing unscrupulously with their arms around each other's shoulders. This Lear did not seem to have the air of an heir or a sworn enemy of the governor's wife. He looked completely like an ordinary low-ranking officer in the army. In this small tavern, he reeked of alcohol and his collar was loose. He stared at the spinning dice on the table and shouted with the others. Then, when he threw out the copper coins he lost, he cursed loudly. Shea had to say that this meeting was much more pleasant than he had imagined. It was as if the two men were the most common kind of men hanging out together, rough and wild. The meeting lasted until almost midnight, and the people in the tavern were almost gone. Lear and Shea seemed to finally have a quiet moment as they sat together at the table. Then Lear said, "You're right. There's another reason." "What do you mean?" Shea narrowed his eyes. He also reeked of alcohol, but at this moment, Shea immediately regained his sobriety. He just deliberately narrowed his eyes and looked at General Lear in front of him. "I think, after I left this afternoon, my dear aunt must have said something to you," Lear said with an indifferent expression. "So, before we met tonight, you must have known who I am and my situation, as well as my role and status in the Besta military region." "Haha, yes, I'm the one who's going to drag the Queen down from her throne. Even though I'm still at a disadvantage, even though most people have pledged their loyalty to that woman, haha, I don't king care." Shea did not say anything. He just looked at Lear. "So you must be thinking, with my aunt's current power in the Besta military region, why doesn't she just get rid of a threat like me?" Lear shrugged, and then he patted Shea. "Haha, I bet 10 gold coins you must have thought about this problem carefully today, right?" Shea smiled and nodded, but still didn't speak. "Well, Shea, you admit it, and I believe you must have analyzed some clues. For example, the reason why my aunt didn't get rid of me is that my uncle is not dead, so she can't do anything to me now. Or, she's just using me to fish, haha. That's right, I'm a target. She purposely kept me alive so that those who were secretly dissatisfied with her would surface and gather around me. Someday in the future, she could easily catch all of them in one fell swoop. Ha 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 ha. You must have thought of this, right?" Speaking of this, Lear narrowed his eyes and deliberately lowered his voice, with a mysterious look. "In fact, there's another reason. Do you know what it is?" "I don't know." Shea shook his head. "I'll tell you because..." Lear took a deep breath and then said seriously in a low voice, "Because that bitch wants to use me to show her magnanimity, to show everyone that she is a great person, that she has the qualities of a person who can achieve great things. Tolerance, magnanimity, and king other things. She wants to show that she doesn't care about me at all. She kept me alive to prove to most people. Look, I don't care about such a small threat at all, because I'm 10,000 times stronger than that little Lear." Shea laughed. This time he really laughed, because Lear's words were really king interesting. "I have to say, a lot of people are king convinced by her. The more she keeps me alive, the more people think that she is unfathomable, that she has a magnanimity and the ability to achieve great things that ordinary people can't. Even though in her heart, she probably can't wait to swallow me whole. But, as I said just now, the people in this world are still convinced by her. But in fact, I know that she is a bitch. Shea looked at Lear's eyes without batting an eyelid. "The bitch you are talking about is your uncle's wife." "You are right." Lear laughed, his face full of drunkenness. "But she is still a bitch. As he said that, he stood up, and after struggling to stand firm, he said loudly, "Do you know what kind of family the Yuri family is? We are not nobles, not traditional nobles. The Yuri family comes from the south-central part of the Byzantine Empire. My great-great-grandfather was just a small farmer who owned a few cotton fields, a bumpkin who struggled in the fields all year round. We drink ale, lean on wine barrels and straw to sleep, wear sackcloth, sometimes wear shoes, sometimes barefoot. But do you know who my aunt is?" He looked into Shea's eyes and said with a ridiculing and absurd tone, "She is an aristocrat." "Ha ha 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 ha, I am right, aristocrat. She said she is an aristocrat. She wears silk, doesn't talk loudly when she eats, uses 3 different forks and 2 different knives to eat a palm-sized steak, and uses more than 6 sets of utensils for dinner. Those nobles call it dining etiquette, but to hell with it. Lao Tzu can do all that with just 1 spoon, and this spoon may not even need to be washed for 3 days. Do you know what aristocrats are?" Aristocrats are hypocrites. Believe me, this woman is the quickest person I know in this world to turn hostile. Shea could not help but laugh. Trust me, I also know a woman. Her speed of turning hostile is not slow either. See, we already have something in common. We will become good brothers, Shea. Lear laughed and patted Shea's shoulder. Then, he suddenly said with a cold voice, "This whore loves to act." She had been acting every single day, every single moment. Although she is a whore, I have to say, her acting skills are damn good. At the very least, she has fooled many people, even my uncle was fooled by her. Oh, that's right, I believe you must have heard the story of her praying to God to have a child, right? Ha 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 ha. Do you really believe that someone like her would sit in a religious prayer room for 3 days and 3 nights without rest, without eating or drinking? Ha 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 ha, what af asterisk king liar. Lear's tone was filled with sarcasm. What I mean is, not eating or drinking for 3 days and 3 nights, that may be possible. But I know her temperament. For this kind of woman to maintain her beauty or her figure, let alone 3 days, she can go 5 to 6 days without eating. But, remember, a aristocrat like her would never go more than 1 day without bathing. Thus, to stay in a prayer room for 3 days and 3 nights, Lao Tzu does not king believe it. Shea laughed. The way this fellow spoke made him sound like a bastard. However, he had to admit that this bastard's words were very interesting, very king interesting. General Lear. Shea frowned. No, call me Lear. I thought we were already friends, Lear laughed. All right, Lear. Shea rubbed his chin. I am now somewhat puzzled. What do you want from me? An ally? Or do you want my support? No, my friend, talking about this is too boring. Let's talk about something more interesting. For example, the 13th method of drinking wine, or I will tell you a few secrets. In the toilet of my house, there is a dartboard with that whore's name written on it. Ha 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 ha. The meeting for the entire night went on like this. It was only after midnight that Lear's guards escorted Shea back to his residence. Lear himself was so drunk that he could not even walk properly. After returning to his room, Shea drank a bowl of thick hangover soup. Then, he exhaled deeply. Dora's voice rang out from his mind. Don't you find it strange? This Lear. I know what you want to say. Shea nodded his head. This fellow suddenly appeared during the day with a forceful attitude. Then, he openly tried to rope me in before the governor's wife and met with me at night. Originally, I thought that he would discuss some conditions with me at night. At the very least, he would talk about something deeper. However, for the entire night, we were like 2 drunkards fooling around. We did not do anything serious. Additionally, he did not hide the fact that he called the governor's wife a whore in front of me. This fellow. I can't see through this fellow. Dora's voice was somewhat unfathomable. The words he said to you at night were too shallow. What I mean is, this fellow does not have any depth. Even if he wanted to rope you in to support him, he could have done it better. The words he said to you did not have any bearing at all. He simply does not seem like someone who can accomplish great things. This fellow is simply a drunkard and a bastard. Do you think that someone like him could pose any threat to the highly intelligent governor's wife? After hearing Dora's words, Shea did not agree with Dora's point of view. Perhaps this is where he is smart. What? The mother dragon was puzzled. That governor's wife is very profound and unfathomable, or rather, she is very hypocritical. Ha ha ha, if we are to compare bearing and acting skills, this Lear is indeed far inferior. Thus, he is very smart to use other aspects to display himself. Indeed, his performance tonight was very coarse, somewhat shallow and somewhat of a bastard. However, it is as he said, many people fall for the governor's wife's style. However, you have to admit that there are also many people in this world who fall for this Lear's style. You may think that his performance tonight was very coarse, But there are also some people who think that he is very frank. Although he is coarse, he is very courageous. Dora, you don't understand. A lot of people, especially men, especially the middle and lower ranking officers in the army, often act like the governor's wife is a standard politician, or drink a bottle of wine worth a few hundred gold coins, hold silver cutlery, and pretend to be deep in conversation with you. The lower ranking officers in the army, those men often don't like this. But this Lear, the coarseness he displayed, laughing and scolding loudly, swearing without a care in the world, using the word whore, drinking and gambling, many of the lower-ranking officers would fall for this. Do you understand? This Lear is actually very smart. He knows what he is good at. If he were to compete with the governor's wife in terms of connections and foundation, then he would be dead meat. But he knows how to develop his influence among the middle and lower-ranking officers, with the support of a few old officials in the Besta military district. I think, even if he can't win against the governor's wife, but at the right time, it is entirely possible to find some trouble for that woman. Dora seemed a little confused. It seemed that this clever female dragon did not know everything. Actually, acting tough is a kind of realm. This time, Shea smiled mysteriously. Deliberately pretending to be profound and unfathomable is, of course, a way. Pretending to be boorish, pretending to be heroic, was also a way to go. This Laird is very smart. Tonight, he didn't say a single word to win me over. He only showed me himself. In this regard, he had shown enough patience. Do you think that if he was really just a coarse bastard, he would have this kind of patience? After a moment of silence, Dora suddenly gave a long sigh. Shea, you have grown up a lot. I am going through a struggle with the concept of writing. In recent days, I have been a little hesitant, a little shaken, I don't know how to describe it. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 435. I am going through a struggle in writing. Lately, or rather, in the last 2 months, some of the things and ideas in writing that I believed in and firmly believed in have been somewhat shaken. The first thing that made me waver was how to write a story. Or rather, how could I win the favor of more readers? This was a very naive question, but it was a question that almost all writers work tirelessly to solve. When writing this book, I made some changes. First of all, the setting. Since this novel had been adapted into a game, I began to pay attention to the settings, such as the world's worldview, the world's framework. I was like an architect, first drawing a framework for myself, then filling it with things. But later on, I was a little confused. I wrote very hard, and the speed kept dropping. I began to feel that this way of writing was not suitable for me, although it is suitable for many writers. In fact, I have never been a setting writer. Leveling up, setting, framework, these have never seemed to be my strong point. Recently, I have been feeling more and more powerless. This feeling makes me very sullen. How should I put it? It is like I am a magician, and I have a rabbit in my hat, but I just can't take it out for everyone to see. In fact, the writing route in this circle is generally divided into two: setting and throttling. In the past, I was partial to the latter. For this book, I began to pay attention to the framework, but this kind of attempt seemed to be smooth in the early stage, but recently, it became more and more difficult to write. I realized that I had made a big mistake. Of course, I wasn't trying to decide which of the two routes was better or worse. There was no good or bad between the two. The mistake I made was, I wanted to do both too much. I wanted to please more readers. I wanted to please the readers whose tastes were more focused on the setting. But while I was working hard, I seemed to have lost some things that I was originally good at. Then I found this point, and when I began to make up for it, I helplessly found that I could not do the best of these two different things at the same time. These 2 days, I finally understood something. My previous mistake was that I tried to do both, and the result was stupid. I could not do both at the same time. Because every writer has something they are good at, and also something they are not good at. If you insist on doing something you are not good at, and throw away what you are good at, that is stupid. After struggling for more than 48 hours, at 5 o'clock in the morning, I suddenly felt free. I stood in the bathroom in my bedroom, standing in front of the mirror and looking at myself. I said to myself, "Hey, I am me, I write what I want to write, that's all. That's right. That's all. By writing this article, I want to tell everyone that dancing is back. From this month onwards, real dancing is back. Because I will no longer hesitate. I will do what I am good at and write according to the feeling I am good at, just like before." Chapter 436. GOR Chapter 413 Decision, 7,000 words. Silence. Silence. Salvatore slammed the table before him, causing a thunderous sound to ring out. Even so, it would appear that not many people in the tent had stopped their clamor. This was the 6th meeting in 3 days. At present, there were a total of 44 representatives from different military regions present in the tent. Some of them were the governors of the military regions, while others were the generals sent by their respective armies. With over 40 people with high authority squeezed into this place, the tent became like a wet market, filled with complaints and clamorous voices of various accents. After 6 meetings in 3 days, as the current chairman of the Red Round Table Conference, Salvatore could feel a chill creeping into his heart. Loss of control. Indeed, he could feel himself gradually losing control over this organization. In the past, he was the chairman and also one of the most powerful warlords within the Red Round Table Conference. He had a group of staunch supporters and allies. Within this organization, his small group was the most powerful. Relying on this strength, he was able to secure his position as the chairman and become the leader of the Red Round Table Conference. But now, or rather, in recent days, Salvatore could only helplessly watch as this organization moved step by step toward collapse. It had been 6 days since the news of Lantis landing had arrived. At the southern port of Catania, the 3rd largest trading port of the empire, a full fleet of Lantis Royal Navy had occupied the port. Over an entire regiment of Lantis army had landed, possessing overwhelming naval power. The army dispatched by Lantis used less than half a day to complete a beautiful landing operation. The 1,000 soldiers stationed at the port of Catania relied on the coastal towers and a small number of crossbows to effectively stop Lantis landing. After losing the port, the defenders of Catania surrendered within 1 hour, handing over the entire city. The Lantis had taken over Catania, an important port located in the southern part of the empire. It was the core of the empire's transportation network. Along with the city falling into the hands of the Lantis, Catania's warehouses and wharves stored a large number of military supplies that were originally intended to be transported to the front line of Osgilla. Among them, there was enough food to last 30,000 soldiers for a month. Lantis had officially issued a letter of credence. This letter of credence affirmed the Byzantium royal family's position within the Byzantine Empire. At the same time, it strongly condemned the treason of the Red Round Table Conference led by Salvatore and Hughes. The letter of credence personally signed by King Lantis demanded, the rebels led by the Red Round Table Conference must immediately cease their treason against the Byzantine Empire. They must immediately withdraw their troops from Osgilla. All troops must return to their stations, and the army must unconditionally accept the reorganization of the Byzantine royal family. Stop some military threats against Osgiliae, and announce the abandonment of all previous positions. Such wording made Salvatore so angry that he almost vomited blood, because the day before he received the official letter of credence from Lantis, he had 2 meetings with the secret emissary from Lantis. The emissary even patted his chest and assured him that as long as the Red Round Table Conference showed enough sincerity, the Lantis kingdom would firmly support their friend. But obviously, the Lantis kingdom chose the Byzantium royal family as their friend in the end. This was a blatant deception, a blatant betrayal, because in the previous lengthy negotiations, the secret emissary even pretended to represent the Lantis kingdom and offered a long list of conditions. These conditions made Salvatore and his supporters waste too much time analyzing and discussing. But in the end, the warships of the Lantis kingdom were already right under their noses. Although only a port city like Catania was captured, and although there were only 30,000 Lantis army disembarking, temporarily unable to pose too much of a threat to the rebel alliance. But Salvatore was very clear about the powerful transport capabilities of the Lantis kingdom's navy. The Byzantium kingdom had a long coastline. With the maritime transport capabilities of the Lantis kingdom, they could easily transport one army after another to any disembarkation point. The Lantis kingdom had joined the war, and they had joined the war as enemies. After Salvatore's anger, he immediately felt a trace of regret. Before the war began, the woman in the Besta military district had written to him, strongly suggesting that the most important thing now was to reach an agreement with the Lantis kingdom at all costs. If necessary, they could even make huge concessions to win the Lantis kingdom over to their side. Unfortunately, because he had already received the promise of the Odin kingdom, his confidence swelled, and he ignored that suggestion. Now that he thought about it, Salvatore was so angry that he wanted to slap himself. The Odin kingdom had already betrayed him. Although they did not release any notes or letters of credence like the Lantis kingdom, the Odin kingdom did not hesitate to swallow up a military district. After this action, the Odin kingdom could no longer exist as his allies. And the Lantis kingdom's participation in the war, however, this was not the most fatal blow. On the third day of the Lantis kingdom's disembarkation, to Salvatore's surprise, the most fatal blow came from the woman he had previously neglected, the Besta military district's governor's wife. The Besta military district announced their withdrawal from the Red Round Table Conference, and they did so in a way that announced it to the world. That announcement was clearly written by that woman. We strongly condemn Chairman Salvatore and the other leaders of the Round Table for committing so many rebellious acts under the influence of personal interests. In order to satisfy their own interests, they have committed many acts of deceit to their allies. The Besta military district has never had any intentions of treason. We have always supported the royal family's rule over the empire and recognized the royal family's position in this great empire. However, the actions of a group of ambitious people led by Salvatore in order to seize power not only hurt the empire, but also deceived many members into becoming their chess pieces. The Besta military district announces that they are completely withdrawing from the Red Round Table. At the same time, they call on more friends who have been deceived by Salvatore and the others to return to the right path. Long live the Byzantine Empire! Long live His Majesty the Emperor! If this announcement was not enough to infuriate Salvatore, then the next rumor was the one that stabbed him in the heart. A rumor quickly spread among the members. The leaders of the Red Round Table, led by Salvatore, did not provide aid and support to the Corsica military district's government in exile that was attacked by the Odin's people. On the contrary, in order to curry favor with those damned Odin's people, they instigated the Besta military district, which had taken in the Corsica government in exile, to harm the remaining members of the Corsica military district. On the Besta military district's side, the governor's wife was finally benevolent. At the last moment, she finally put down the butcher's knife and gave the Corsicans a way out. At the same time, the Besta military district was bitterly disappointed by the cruel actions of the leaders of the alliance towards their allies. This was the real reason why the Besta military district announced their withdrawal. The reason why this rumor was able to spread and gain the trust of many people was because the rumor said that the governor's wife of the Besta military district was even willing to personally testify that Salvatore had once instigated her to kill Corsica's Gaia. She even had a secret letter personally written by Salvatore. Salvatore's prestige in the alliance fell to the lowest point in just 2 days. Cracks began to appear in the alliance. First of all, the governors of the northern military district openly expressed their distrust of the alliance, especially the leaders led by Salvatore. This was because their territory was in the north, very close to the Odin's people. When the Corsicans met with a tragic fate, Salvatore betrayed them without hesitation. What if the same thing happened to me? This was the strongest thought in the minds of many governors of the northern military district. Apart from that, many people who supported Salvatore also began to change sides. The reason was simple. This matter was too disgraceful. No matter the time, it was intolerable to harm one's own members in such a way. Even if Salvatore wasn't the only one who made this decision. But, since all the spearheads were now pointing at Salvatore, and it seemed that the chairman was going to be finished, at this time, many people, even Salvatore's former allies, couldn't wait to jump out and draw a clear line with Salvatore. What made Salvatore angry was that among these people who jumped out to draw a clear line with him, there were a few who used to be his confidants. The idea of getting rid of the Corsican government in exile was more or less due to these people's contributions. And now, it seemed that he had become the best scapegoat and candidate to take the blame for this matter. Everyone knew that Salvatore's fall was only a matter of time. He could no longer continue to hold the position of chairman and lead the alliance. After losing the position of chairman, Salvatore was no longer qualified to continue to be the leader of his small group. This was a chain reaction. Therefore, in the emergency meetings held over the past few days to discuss a countermeasure to deal with Lantis's participation in the war, as well as how to react to the betrayal of the Besta military district, who had already announced their withdrawal from the alliance, no conclusion was reached. Almost every one of the 6 meetings turned into an endless internal quarrel, shirking of responsibilities, and verbal abuse. Some people complained about why Salvatore's leader didn't do a good job of communicating with Lantis. Some people complained that forming an alliance with Odin's people was a foolish act. Now, the betrayal of Odin's people was the best proof. Some people complained that the alliance had too much trust in the Besta military district. Some people complained about the lack of resources allocated to their troop. Some people complained that their defense zone was too far forward and took on too much responsibility. Some people thought that they should continue to negotiate with Lantis's people. Some people thought that Lantis's 30,000 soldiers weren't worth worrying about and that they should focus on attacking the Besta military district to prevent this kind of betrayal from happening again. Some people insisted that they should focus on attacking Osgilla before winter arrived. Once they defeated Osgilla and eliminated the Byzantium royal family, then whether it was Lantis's people or the Besta military district, they wouldn't be a problem anymore. In short, all kinds of arguments filled the meeting. Everyone was a hero and had military power in their hands. If you didn't agree with me, I didn't agree with you. If it was in the past, Salvatore, as the president, could use his prestige and wide connections in the alliance to mediate and integrate the alliance into a whole. But now he became the target of everyone's disdain. Salvatore slammed the table until his palms hurt, but the noise below did not seem to stop at all. If it was in the past, as long as Salvatore coughed heavily and swept his gaze over them, these people would all shut up. But now the only result he got from slamming the table was a few unfriendly looks. This alliance is finished. Salvatore lamented in his heart. I suggest that we immediately elect a new president. Only a true leader can lead this group to make a united decision. I initiate the impeachment of Mr. Salvatore. Among the crowd, a voice suddenly rang out and covered the voices of the others. This suggestion immediately received the approval of many people, and many military districts reconsidered. Salvatore sneered and looked at the person who spoke first. This was originally one of his supporters, but he betrayed him yesterday. He could completely understand the mentality of these traitors. After betraying him, these traitors wanted him to be completely defeated as soon as possible. Because these traitors were more afraid of his revenge than others, once they betrayed him, they would become the enemies that wanted him dead the most. Facing the raging crowd, Salvatore sighed in his heart. He slammed the table once more and shouted with all his might, "Silence! Quiet!" This time, the crowd finally quieted down a little. "I know that you all want me to move my butt from this chair." Salvatore's tone was full of mockery as he shouted, "But I have to remind you, gentlemen, this is a very special time. We have used a few months, and we have 10 times the military strength, but we still haven't been able to defeat Osgilla. At the same time, the Lantis people have joined the war and are standing on the opposite side of us. The Odin people have stabbed us in the back. The Besta people have also betrayed us. All of these things are piled up in front of us, and each of them is far more important than electing a new president. If we can't focus on the most important things and continue to pursue these trivial matters and fight for these small benefits, then we will be destroyed by our enemies sooner or later." Salvatore's words made many people truly quiet down. It seemed that for a moment, there were quite a few people who were shaken. "But soon, is that so? Sir Salvatore, it seems that we don't need to wait for our enemies to destroy us, but will be destroyed by you first. Regarding this question, can we ask Corsica's Gaia? Or do you want to ask your ally, the Odins? Don't push the responsibility away. Salvatore, the one who caused all of this is you. You can't continue to steer this ship. Only a new helmsman can steer this ship in the right direction." Salvatore's body swayed and he raised his head to look. The one who had said those words was one of his trusted supporters. But now, this guy was glaring at him with a vicious gaze. Salvatore understood. This fellow had already contacted some of the members of his small group. They had already reached an agreement to promote him to the position of president. Humph, what a joke. "I can move my butt." Salvatore took a deep breath and suddenly stood up straight. He glared fiercely at that fellow and said coldly, "I don't need your reminder. This ship needs a new captain, but you, my dear Sammy, I don't think you have the right to criticize me. Oh, let me think, I seem to have left some interesting letters with your signature on them. Oh, that's right, if you don't want me to take out those things now, then shut your mouth and put your pitiful wisdom into proper business." That fellow immediately became short of breath and cowered away from Salvatore's gaze. "But Salvatore, I think he's right," a governor of the military region said loudly. "Even if we want to deal with Odin, Lantis, and continue to attack Osgilla, we need a leader to do all of these things. But obviously, this person won't be you. Salvatore, I'll be frank, I don't trust you. My military region is in the north, less than 600 li away from Corsica's military region. This fellow was a governor of the north." His words immediately attracted more voices from the northern military region. Salvatore's aged face was full of dejection. He still tried his best to stand up straight, but his hands were already trembling slightly. At this moment, bang! The door was kicked open. Then, a pair of beautifully polished leather boots came in, followed by a pair of perfectly ironed breeches without a single wrinkle. There was also a well-ironed uniform, with shiny ribbons and medals, and meticulously combed hair. Governor Hughes of Armenia suddenly walked into the venue. The appearance of this noble governor was in line with his usual style. He didn't dress like he was attending a military meeting at all, but more like he was attending a banquet. When he walked in, he even used a snow-white handkerchief to cover his nose. "Gentlemen!" Hughes stretched his voice and shouted, immediately suppressing the voices of the audience. He walked to the table in high spirits, then walked around the table and stood in front of Salvatore. Hughes raised his head and then glanced at Salvatore. Salvatore smiled bitterly in his heart. He knew very well that Hughes would not let go of such an opportunity. For a long time, Hughes had been competing with him for the leadership position in the Red Round Table Alliance. In the past few days of meetings, he had sent people to invite him to attend, but Hughes had never been present. In fact, it had been many days since Governor Hughes had participated in any military meetings. The calculation of time started from that terrible night. On the night of the Rodrian cavalry's raid, Governor Hughes' Armenian army suffered huge losses. The cavalry was almost wiped out, and the infantry suffered heavy losses. 2 regiments were defeated by the Rodrian cavalry. The Armenian army suffered a great loss. Everyone knew that in this world, the army in hand was the king. After the heavy losses of the army, Hughes' position in the alliance was also threatened. At least, for the time being, he no longer had the status to pose a threat to Salvatore. After losing more than half of his army, Hughes was no longer qualified to compete with Salvatore for the leadership position. Since then, the proud and arrogant Hughes had never participated in any military meetings again. Every time, he would only send his subordinate generals to attend for the occasion. He even returned to the military districts of Armenia to recuperate for half a month. Therefore, in this meeting, Salvatore originally did not expect this guy to appear, but he did. It was obvious that this fellow was here to add insult to injury. Salvatore sighed in his heart. Forget it. At least, the last blow was dealt by this guy. It was much more glorious than being bitten to death by those despicable people. If my position is taken by him, it can be regarded as a dignified step down. He tried to look at Hughes with a calm look. He usually looked at his biggest political enemy. Just when Salvatore looked at Hughes with this almost tragic look, the noble governor suddenly smiled. Hughes's smile seemed a little sly. Then he turned around, took a step to the side, and sat in a seat on Salvatore's left, his own seat. "Gentlemen, didn't you say you wanted to discuss some important matters? Why didn't I see a group of noble governors and future kings when I came in, but a group of frightened and uneasy stray dogs?" Hughes sneered and deliberately said in a casual tone, "Well, let's pay more attention to some important matters. In the face of a great enemy, the spirit of unity is the most important. Oh yes, Mr. Salvatore, please continue to preside over the meeting." As he spoke, Hughes closed his mouth and pretended to be ready to listen carefully. After Hughes finished speaking, the representatives of the military districts below seemed to be a little unprepared. Then, many people closed their mouths and quietly turned back to their seats under the gaze of Hughes. These people were the representatives of the military districts that originally supported Hughes. With such a powerful character like Hughes holding down the fort, order was instantly restored to the scene. In the following meeting, Salvatore continued to preside over as the chairman. Although there were still people who objected, every time Salvatore raised a suggestion, it would receive Hughes's full support. This meeting lasted for an hour, but the effect was better than the previous 5 meetings combined. When the meeting ended and everyone left, Hughes still didn't move. He was still sitting in his seat. Salvatore also quietly waited for everyone to leave before he walked in front of Hughes. Why? Faced with this question, Hughes looked up and glanced at Salvatore, then smiled. "I think that a gentleman who has served the Alliance for 20 years should not be treated like this." Salvatore smiled. "Well, you and I both know that we are not kind people. Why, Hughes, I thought of many possibilities, but none of them expected you to stand up and support me. Even you and I know very well that over the years, now is the best time for you to bring me down." Hughes smiled, stood up, turned and walked to the door. His leather boots made a whistling sound, and his footsteps suddenly stopped at the door. This guy turned and looked at Salvatore, his eyes bright. "I would be happy to replace you as the leader of this alliance. But the premise is that this alliance must continue to exist. In the current situation, we must first unite to get through this difficult time. I don't want to be finished with you, Salvatore. And I believe that if you and I were in different positions, you would also do what I did today. Because in this group, there are too many fools and too few smart people. Ha ha ha. With that, he strode out of the door. Shea stayed in Husk City for half a month. The governor's wife would invite him to have lunch with her almost every day. Sometimes in the afternoon, they would go hunting together or go hiking outside the city. Sometimes, in the evening, he would go to the tavern to drink with the governor's wife's nephew, General Lear. They would play the organ and drink with a group of officers. When the mood was high, they would gamble a few times. This kind of life was simply too comfortable. It was so comfortable that Shea almost forgot the time. At least on the surface, he seemed to be so. Finally, at noon, after having lunch with the governor's wife, Shea returned to his residence. As soon as he walked into the hall, he saw a familiar figure standing there waiting. A handsome and delicate face with a cynical smile, the corners of his mouth clearly showing a bit of mockery. His uniform was wrinkled and his collar was crooked. Dax stood there, appearing in a very Dax style in front of Shea. Shea sighed, looked at this guy, and said with a wry smile, "Of all the candidates they just had to send you? Don't complain, my boss." Dax sighed. "Everyone else is so busy, but I'm the only one who's free. That's why I've been sent here to do this hard work." Saying this, he winked at Shea. "When he received your handwritten letter from the Besta military district, Green was so angry that he flipped the table. Oh, right, before I came, Green said that when I see you, I must help him give you a few tight slaps, you irresponsible guy. His original words were, 'You've been our boss for less than half a year, and you've been disappearing for 3 months. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen, please go to www.chidien.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading." Chapter 437. GOR Chapter 414 Chest, 6,000 words. Dax's words made Shea a little embarrassed. Thinking about it carefully, he was indeed a little too irresponsible as a boss. Almost most of the military affairs were handed over to Green to oversee. Every now and then, he would cause a situation and then disappear for a period of time. It was no wonder that Mad Dog Green would go crazy. Shea gave an embarrassed smile and rubbed his nose. Let's not talk about things out of anger. Let's talk business. What did Green say after reading my letter?" "What else can he say?" Dax pursed his lips to the side and leaned lazily on the chair to stretch his body. "All I can say is, my boss, you have once again proven one thing. Your luck is truly heaven-defying. You actually managed to hook up with the Besta military region. No matter how you cut it, after our analysis, if we can establish a good relationship with the Besta military region, it will be beneficial for us. Thus, Green kicked me over to your side and had me assist you in accomplishing this mission." "Originally, I thought they would send Reinhardt," Shea muttered. Dax quickly put on a sad expression. "Boss, you actually look down on me. Oh my God, don't forget how much I have done for you. Shouldn't my salary be increased a bit? Or should I be reimbursed for some special expenses? Last time, when I contacted the intelligence network, I spent a lot of money. That despicable Green would always come up with all sorts of excuses to refuse to reimburse me." Shea harumphed and gave Dax a glance. "Special expenses? Humph. I have seen your list before. Things like going to a brothel with someone from the Chamber of Commerce or buying jewelry for someone's wife. Do you think I would reimburse you? Those things have their uses." Dax shrugged his shoulders. "You know, in order to establish relationships with certain places, if the local generals and officials are too difficult to deal with, we might as well start with their wives. You should know, few women can resist the charm of jewelry. I am doing all this for our cause. Besides, going to a brothel nearly hurt my stomach. All right, stop talking nonsense. Shea waved his hand. Let's get down to business. Did you bring anything that I'm interested in this time? Dax sighed and muttered in a low voice, Damn, with such a stingy boss, Lao Tzu's life is really not too good. As he spoke, he pulled out a booklet from his pocket and threw it in front of Shea. I got this through some connections before I came here. Because time was too tight, the information is only superficial. I'm sure you already know a lot of it. If you give me a little more time and a little more money, I promise I can dig up any secret information you want to know. Haha. I heard that the governor's wife is very beautiful. Even if you want to know the color of her underwear, I can find out for you. Shut up! Shea shouted angrily. Who the F***ck wants to know the color of her underwear? Dax shrunk his neck and said in an almost inaudible voice, I'd really like to know. Although Dax always made Shea annoyed, he had to admit that this guy's efficiency was top-notch. The booklet he brought was a list of names. It contained the information of all the core members of the Besta military district. Age, position, resume, and even some personal hobbies were listed in the list. Although this information wasn't as detailed as the one he had seen in the portrait album in the hands of the governor's wife that day, Dax being able to do this can be considered to be quite capable. After all, he seemed to have neglected the collection of information before. Looks like I really should give this guy more money. Shea calculated in his mind. From a power analysis, the Besta military district's true power is much stronger than it looks. This governor's wife has been in power for many years and has always pursued a strategy of hiding wealth from the people. This strategy didn't have much effect in the first 2 years, but from the 3rd year of her administration, it gradually started to show its benefit. First of all, the Besta military district's citizens entered a period of prosperity. The citizens' businesses flourished, and from the 3rd year onwards, their taxes started to increase greatly. Simply put, boss, this woman is very rich and much richer than you. Almost all of the top 10 companies on the continent have important branches in the Besta military district. The Besta military district has a good relationship with these companies. Relying on their wealth, the Besta military district has armed 20,000 soldiers. Please note, these 20,000 soldiers are all armed according to the standards of the Empire's Central Standing Army. Whether it's training, pay, or equipment, it's all done according to the standards of the Empire's Central Army. In addition, they have over 8,000 local garrisons and guards. Also, I found an interesting piece of information. For the past 3 years, the Besta military district has been purchasing military equipment from a few fixed companies twice a year. This includes the important strategic resources, weapons and armor. Twice a year, the total amount of purchases exceeds 2 million gold coins. In other words, in the past 3 years, the Besta military district has invested 6 million gold coins in purchasing strategic resources. According to the Empire's standards, it takes 2 million gold coins to equip a central standing army. Their reserves are enough to equip 2 or 3 more armies. So, how should I put it, this woman is very ambitious. In addition, the Besta military district's peasant soldier system has existed in name only since Governor Yuri was young. They've already given up on the peasant soldier system, which costs a lot and yields little. Instead, they've adopted a semi-military reserve system. What makes me very surprised is that this system is very similar to the Lantis reserve system. So I have reason to believe that this governor's wife's military construction strategy is largely based on the Lantis kingdom's reserve system. In the past 3 years, they have spent more than 1 million gold coins on the training of reserve soldiers. Although I am unable to accurately estimate how many reserve soldiers they have trained, but based on the ratio of investment, I believe that under the premise of spending 1 million gold coins, if the viceroy's wife isn't an idiot, or if her subordinates aren't too corrupt, and if most of the money is spent where it should be spent, then there should be some results. Based on this inference, they might have more than 40,000 reserve soldiers. You have to know that the total population of the Besta military district is less than 1 million, so this ratio is already very high. Simply put, if you want to describe the Besta military district's strength, it can be summed up in one sentence. Rich. They have soldiers. Hee. Shea sat there, quietly listening to Dax's explanation. He rubbed his brows. That's it? Is there anything else? Go on. There are some other things that are my personal deductions. Dax sighed and closed the booklet. There wasn't enough time, so I couldn't get more information, but I think my deductions are somewhat reasonable. Although the Besta military district has a considerable amount of hidden strength, it also has a few huge drawbacks. The first problem is food. As I said earlier, the total population of the Besta military district is less than 1 million. They now have close to 30,000 soldiers, and I've deduced 40,000 reserve soldiers. If you add in the auxiliary soldiers and tax soldiers, their military population should be around 100,000. Take note, this number accounts for 1/10 of their total population. Based on their total population of 1 million, then let's make a simple deduction. Half are men and half are women, and half are old and weak. The Besta military district has a population of 1 million, so theoretically speaking, the number of men in their prime shouldn't exceed 300,000. And 100,000 of them have already been used in the military, so I don't need to say more about the following situation, you should be able to guess. The number of people working in agriculture has greatly decreased. These past few years, the Besta military district had to purchase large amounts of food every year, and their own production wasn't enough to satisfy the local need. In terms of food consumption, they have always had two stable sources. One is the Corsica military district. Interesting details. The other source is the procurement of food from the military districts in the southeast. Then here's the problem now. The Corsica military district has already been occupied by the Odin people. I'm afraid that with the ability of those barbaric Odin people, even the most fertile land would be abandoned in their hands. The Odin people aren't good at farming, so in the future, at least the Corsica military district won't be able to continue providing food to the Besta military district. As for the other military districts, the Besta military district has already announced their withdrawal from the Red Round Table Alliance, so at least the other military districts won't openly sell food to them. So, finding a new source of food as soon as possible is a problem for the Besta military district. The second problem is their internal affairs. Their heir, Governor Yuri, is already over 50 years old. When he was young, he was as energetic as a dragon and as ferocious as a tiger, but he couldn't give birth to a child. I don't think this old man over 50 years old can give birth to a child. Although the governor's wife has been doing very well these past few years, she is still a woman. To the Yuri family, she is still an outsider. Although she has won over some people's hearts, there are still some old officials of the Yuri family who still hold on to orthodox views, so… You mean that Lear fellow? Shea nodded. I've already met this Lear. He should be a powerful character. That's right. Dax nodded. But the governor's wife is even more outstanding. Since last year, although Mr. Lear had obtained some opportunities with the support of many old courtiers, and the governor's wife seemed to have been pressured into relinquishing some authority to Lear, but overall, the majority of the regular army was still firmly grasped in the governor's wife's hands. Moreover, the most important problem is, Governor Yuri himself seems to still have a lot of trust in his wife. To be honest, I've always been very puzzled about this. Shea smiled bitterly in agreement. Dax sighed. This Governor Yuri seems to love his wife a little too much. And this degree of trust, I believe it far exceeds the trust between a normal husband and wife. Even if he loves a woman, he should at least think about the future of his family. Moreover, according to the information I've gathered, this Governor Yuri, it seems, that he's not someone who would secretly love a woman over his family. What I mean is, although he is a playboy, at least when he was younger, he showed some ambition and a sense of responsibility to his family. Now, how should I put it? He has practically given the entire Yuri family to his wife. To be honest, this degree of generosity, at least if it was me, I wouldn't be able to do it. After all, the Besta military district is the foundation of the Yuri family. From a certain point of view, this isn't Governor Yuri's private property, but rather the inheritance of the family. So, to his wife, Governor Yuri seems to be too generous, but to his family, he seems to be too irresponsible. Shea's eyes lit up. You mean? Could it be that there is something? I don't have any evidence, so I can only make some guesses. Or perhaps Governor Yuri's generosity is a kind of guilt and compensation. You know, in the relationship between an old man and a young wife, the husband will often treat the young wife out of guilt and compensation. Hee. Dax smiled ambiguously, coughing a few times, and then said seriously, no matter what, the governor's wife's current position is very stable, but the prerequisite is that she has the trust of Governor Yuri. After all, Governor Yuri is the true owner of the Besta military district, and the governor's wife is only a representative. If Governor Yuri suddenly doesn't trust his wife, we can imagine that she can fight for power with her nephew, but she can't fight for power with her husband, because if she dares to show the slightest intention of going against her husband, then the prestige she painstakingly built over the years will instantly collapse. In other words, the governor's wife's position is based on Governor Yuri's trust. This position seems very stable, but it is also very dangerous. Another problem is Governor Yuri's health. After all, he is an old man who is over 50 years old. And I heard that when he was young, he spent a lot of time indulging in wine and women. Boss, I can bet that in this world, if a man spends too much time indulging in wine and women, then he will definitely not be able to live long. Even if Governor Yuri still trusts his wife, but if he suddenly dies, then this governor's wife's position will be very awkward. Her legal position in the Besta military district comes from her husband, and if her husband dies, at least in terms of status, she will have no reason to continue ruling the military district. But this problem doesn't seem to be a problem for the time being. According to the information I found, Governor Yuri's health was very poor in the past few years, at least in the third year of their marriage. He almost died from illness twice, but fortunately he survived. But strangely, from the fourth year onwards, Governor Yuri's health gradually stabilized. Although he is still a big pot of medicine, but there is no longer a dangerous situation where he could die at any time. It is clear that this governor's wife is very clear about her situation, so she is very attentive and concerned about her husband's health. Governor Yuri lives in seclusion, living the most comfortable life, and the governor's wife invited at least 3 famous doctors from the continent to take care of Governor Yuri. But no matter what, he is still an old man in his 50s, and no matter how well he maintains his health, this problem will be exposed in the next few years. Once Governor Yuri dies from illness and there is no successor, this governor's wife's status will immediately become very awkward. The information I collected recorded an interesting incident. Just 2 years ago, when the governor's wife prayed for blessings to no avail, she once expressed her intention to adopt a child on some occasions. However, as soon as this intention was revealed, it was opposed by almost all of her subordinates. Even the subordinates who were very loyal to her were resolutely against this matter, and in the end, this matter was dropped. Dax finally finished his words, and his analysis was very clear. Shea nodded with satisfaction. It seems that Green's decision to send you here is indeed correct. Dax, you have done well. Then, can you consider a raise? This guy smiled shamelessly at Shea. Shea sighed, looked at Dax, and said earnestly, a raise? How come I have never heard of such a thing? In the short term, get on the good side of the governor's wife, but still maintain contact with Lear, and it is enough to control this contact to a limited degree of goodwill. This was the conclusion that Dax came to for Shea after his analysis. The two of them had the same view. At least before Governor Yuri dies, no one can shake that woman's ruling position in the Besta military district. They need us. Dax put forward another point of view. The food problem must be solved. Since they can't purchase outside, then the only choice left for the Besta people is war. They had so many elite troops and stockpiled so many resources and reserve. This strength was not something to be hoarded and played house. Next year, the Besta people will have a headache over the food problem. At that time, their only choice is to start a war against their neighbors, to invade and plunder. And at this time they need us. Whether the target of their war is the Corsica region occupied by Odin or somewhere else, they need our cooperation. We can help them contain Manninger's forces and share their pressure. Just as the conversation between the two ended, suddenly someone came in from outside to report that General Lear had sent someone to request an audience with Marshal Shea and had brought a gift. Shea had experienced this kind of thing many times in the past 2 days. Both Lear and the governor's wife were very warm towards him. While he was living here, he would receive gifts from both sides almost every day. Most of the gifts from the governor's wife were luxurious clothes and daily necessities. Lear, on the other hand, sent gifts that were more manly, such as some well-made swords, or a high-quality bow that he had just obtained, or a barrel of good wine that he had obtained. Shea's principle in regards to the intentions of both sides to recruit him was, don't refuse. No matter what good things were sent to him, he would accept them without hesitation. After receiving the notice, Shea and Dax walked out of the meeting room together. The one who came to deliver the gift was one of General Lear's personal guards. This guy had met Shea many times in the past 2 days and had even drunk with him a few times. Both sides were very familiar with each other. After bowing respectfully to Shea, he left behind a gift. It was a large box. Inside the box was a well-made saddle, stirrups, and bridle. This set of saddles was clearly expensive. The stirrups and bridle were actually made of pure gold. Even the reins were made of high-quality cowhide. Shea politely accepted the gift and sent the personal guard captain away. When he returned, he saw that Dax had already moved the box into the meeting room. This guy had an envious look on his face as he held onto the stirrups made of pure gold. His face looked like he was about to drool. Seeing Shea come in, Dax chuckled and said, "Boss, this thing is not bad. I spent quite a bit of my own money to get that information. Even if you don't want to reimburse me, you can reward me with these things as compensation. How about it?" Shea glared at this guy, but this Dax was clearly not afraid of Shea. Facing Shea's glare, he still had that mischievous smile on his face. Shea finally sighed and said, "All right, don't make such a disgusting face. If you like it, take it." Dax's face immediately lit up with a smile. After he took out the entire set of harness from the box, he was about to ask someone to bring a horse over to try it on, but at that moment, Dax suddenly stopped and lowered his head to look inside the box. The mischievous smile on his face had completely disappeared. His brows were tightly knitted and a strange light flashed in his eyes as he carefully looked inside the box. "What's wrong?" Shea's heart skipped a beat and he immediately walked to his side. Dax took a deep breath and said, "There's something inside the box." Shea looked inside, but the box was empty. How could there be anything inside? Dax sneered and said, "Sir, you won't be able to tell. Hey. The bottom of this box is engraved with a special material. The material used to engrave the words is special, and it's engraved in diagonal lines, so unless you're an expert, you won't be able to see it at all." As he spoke, he pulled Shea to a different angle and stood next to the box. "Stand here, at this angle. Bend over, a little more to the side. Do you see it? Inside the box, there's a small line of words. Dax's smile was very complicated. A very standard Lantis spy technique. Looks like this general's knowledge is quite profound. He actually knows this kind of technique. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support legal reading. Chapter 438. GOR Chapter 415A Shocking Secret Behind a Name, 10,000 Words. It was a line of code written using a special type of paint and an ingenious angle. If one did not look at it from a special angle, they would not be able to see that there was a line of code written at the bottom of the box. Shea followed Dax's instructions and tilted his head slightly to look at it. Then, he reached out with his hand to feel the bottom of the box, and sure enough, he was able to see what was inside. This is Ivan Godric. It seems to be a person's name? Shea tried to read out the secret text, and then turned his head to look at Dax with a frown. It's a name? What does it mean? Dax smiled wryly. Boss, I am not omnipotent. This is indeed a name. However, how would I know the meaning behind this name? Shea opened his mouth awkwardly and said, I thought it might be some kind of secret code. I have heard that people like you who work in the intelligence industry would have secret codes. Maybe this name is one of them. Dax narrowed his eyes and reached out with his hand to stroke the code written at the bottom of the box. He muttered, This is a very standard method. However, this name is very unfamiliar to me. Humph humph. Seeing that Dax also did not know the meaning behind this line of code, Shea felt disappointed. However, a strong feeling of doubt rose up in his mind. This Lear sent someone to deliver this box with such a name hidden inside. What does this name mean? Dax pulled out a small knife from his boot. He squinted his eyes and carefully inspected the box. Then, he used the knife in his hand to scrape off the hidden text at the bottom of the box. He said indifferently, The purpose of this box is to send us this line of text. Now that we have received the message, we can destroy these traces. Boss, your question is the key. That Lear, using this method to tell us a name, what does this name mean? That is the key question. Shea frowned and thought about it for a moment. However, he was unable to figure it out. However, being a boss has its benefits. Since he could not figure it out, Shea shamelessly put on a straight face and looked at Dax. All right, Dax. Since we have a question, it is your job to answer it. Hey, don't look at me like that. You have to be worthy of the salary I pay you. The next task is to find out the origin of this name. This is your task. Dax sighed and looked at Shea. Then, he said something from the bottom of his heart. Boss, I have to admit that I've served quite a few bosses. When I was in Lantis, I had several bosses, and I've served quite a few difficult people. However, if we're talking about shamelessness, you're number one. Although Dax has always pretended to be lazy, cynical, and messy when doing things, in fact, Shea is very clear that once this guy works, his efficiency is astonishingly high. More importantly, Shea still had not figured out how many cards this guy had up his sleeves and how many resources this guy had in his hand. Although Shea was now certain that this guy was sent by Lantis, he did not seem to have much loyalty to the Lantis kingdom, and he never seemed to hide it. Bobov Dax was not loyal to the Lantis kingdom, and he was not loyal to Shea Thunder either. The only person this guy was loyal to was himself. No, this guy was not even loyal to himself. Dax left on the same day. Although Husk was a military town, there were still shops and caravans here. After Asriya was occupied by the Besta military district, there was not much fighting, so the trade routes here had been kept open. There were also several small trading posts in Husk. After Dax left for a day, he brought some progress in the evening. My whereabouts have been tracked by a few people. I'm not sure if they are the governor's wife's men or Lear's. I went to a few places and then sent the news out. So, boss, it won't be long before I get more information. I think there might be some things we need, such as who this person is." When he returned, Dax reported his work to Shea while reeking of alcohol. Apart from the smell of alcohol, there was also the smell of cheap perfume on his body. It was obvious that Dax had not been to a good place. Shea was already used to having such a strange subordinate. Even if Dax was dead drunk, he would still be able to complete his work. Even when he was fooling around with a prostitute, he was still doing his job. You couldn't make any demands on this kind of person, as long as the results were good, that was enough. Shea had already changed into formal attire while listening to Dax's report. He had been invited to a small banquet hosted by the governor's wife. "It's so unfair. I'm so tired from running around outside, but you're going to a banquet with a beauty at night." Dax threw himself on the chair without a care for his image, and put his feet up on the table. "Boss, let's discuss how to deal with the beautiful governor's wife tonight." The scale of the banquet at the garrison mansion was larger than what Shea had expected. Apart from some of the generals in Husk, Shea was surprised that the governor's wife had summoned several important people in the Besta military district to Husk. The general of the 1st Division of the Besta military district, several important officials in the governor's office, and the chief logistics officer of the Besta military district. These people all occupied important positions in the Besta military region. Shea didn't expect that all of them would come to Husk City. At the banquet in the evening, the governor's wife openly announced Shea's identity to everyone. There was no need to hide it at this point. The Besta military district had publicly left the Red Round Table Alliance and was in an isolated situation. Shea's identity and the forces behind him, as well as Shea's personal appearance in Husk, was of great significance to the Besta military district. At this time, it was always good to have an ally. When Shea's identity was announced, Shea noticed that several of the core figures in the Besta military district did not have any surprised expressions. Obviously, they had already known the truth. The beautiful governor's wife was wearing a fiery red evening gown tonight, with a fiery red foxtail around her neck. This woman seemed to have a special liking for bright colors. However, Shea had to admit that the well-tailored evening gown perfectly displayed the alluring curves of this beautiful woman. The governor's wife accompanied Shea all night, introducing him to every important official in the Besta military district. She smiled sweetly and was a very enthusiastic hostess. What made Shea somewhat restless was that this woman's body had a delicate fragrance that seeped into his heart and lungs. This smell was clearly much more attractive than the cheap perfume that Dax wore in the evening. What made Shea heave a sigh of relief was that, at tonight's banquet, the Besta military district finally put forward some conditions to him, although it was implied. And these conditions did not come from the governor's wife, but from the Besta military district's logistics chief, who was standing next to the governor's wife at the banquet. He had a sinister smile on his face as he spoke in a subtle way. "Our finance department is going to have a headache tomorrow. The military has been complaining about the lack of manpower, but the finance department is complaining that the military has taken away too many young men. Sigh, every time there is a problem like this, they always ask me to mediate. God knows I've heard enough of this kind of complaint. Madam, if you ask me to do this kind of thing again, I really won't be able to resist the urge to resign. Ha 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 ha. The military wants to recruit more young men, but the finance department wants to keep these young men in the field. Food will not grow on its own, ha ha, that's what they said to me." Hearing this guy's joking complaints, the governor's wife's smile did not change at all. She did not even look at Shea. However, Shea immediately realized that this was the first condition that the other party had put forward. He thought for a moment and raised his wine glass. "Perhaps as a friend I should share my friend's worries. Although I can't lend troops to your department, but Moor has always been one of the most important grain-producing areas in the north of the empire. Perhaps at the end of the year, I will welcome you to Denzel City as a guest, and we can discuss some business possibilities." The governor's wife immediately smiled happily and changed the topic to an interesting story about a hunting trip. Shea was very clear that the people he was meeting tonight were the core members of the Besta military district who were truly loyal to the governor's wife. This woman had gathered her team to meet him, which was her last act of sincerity. However, compared to this woman's actions and progress, that General Lear did not seem to be doing anything new. These days, everyone was just drinking and having fun together. Today, he secretly sent someone to deliver a box with a strange name. Other than that, there was nothing else. The banquet went on until late at night. Only then did the guests leave. Shea, on the other hand, expressed his intention to leave several times. However, the governor's wife would always smile and change the topic. Shea realized that this woman was trying to make him stay. After all the guests had left, the governor's wife looked at Shea, who was beside her. This woman's originally beautiful face was smeared with a layer of blush. This was the kind of lovely blush caused by alcohol. She looked at Shea and smiled. "Sir Marshal, are you interested in going to the courtyard with me to look at the stars?" Shea smiled and did not comment. The garden of the governor's mansion was not too big. However, it was clear that it had been meticulously prepared. A table was set up in the middle of the garden. On top of the table was some food. It was just some simple bread and jam. The lawn and flower bed were meticulously constructed, clean and beautiful. Shea followed the governor's wife into the garden. Looking at the food on the table, he smiled. "It seems Madame has prepared something for me to eat. Call me Monica, Sir Marshal. As a friend, calling me Madame is too much of an outsider." The governor's wife looked at Shea with a smile. "All right, Monica." Shea smiled. "If so, can you also not call me Sir Marshal? You and I both know that this Marshal does not have much territory or army under him. You can call me Shea. That is what all my friends call me." "All right, Shea." Monique smiled, revealing her pearly white teeth. Then, she suddenly stretched her body and loosened the bun on her head, allowing her long, silky hair to fall down. This action looked very charming. Moreover, the silky hair made the lines of her face look much gentler. Soon after, the woman's actions surprised Shea. This woman, who had maintained an elegant posture for the entire night, unexpectedly didn't have any scruples. In front of Shea, she reached out and grabbed a piece of brown bread, dipped it in some sweet jam, and stuffed a large piece into her mouth. The jam even stained her fingers. She, too, casually placed her fingers into her mouth and sucked on them a few times. Seeing the look of shock on Shea's face, a trace of pride flashed across this woman's eyes. "What is it? Are you not hungry? Truth be told, I hate this kind of cocktail party the most. There is always a group of people holding wine glasses and discussing those boring matters. I haven't eaten anything for the entire night. I am starving." Shea finally smiled. He copied this woman's actions, rolling up his sleeves and stuffing the bread into his mouth. Then, he muttered, "If only there is a piece of roasted meat." The roasted meat was quickly served. The two of them were separated by a table, and they gobbled down the food without a care for their image. This governor's wife no longer looked elegant and beautiful. Instead, she gave off a sense of cuteness and straightforwardness. After eating to their heart's content, this woman dipped the bread into the remaining jam on the plate. Then, she suddenly said in a casual tone, "Mr. Dax, you are very busy today." Shea quickly put down the food in his hand. He crossed his arms and stared at her. There was an expression of "finally here" on his face. He smiled and said, "Madam, are you very concerned about the whereabouts of my subordinates? Call me Monica. If you call me by the wrong name again, you will have to drink as punishment." The governor's wife smiled. Shea immediately picked up the wine glass and took a big gulp. Shea, I am getting more and more curious about you. Monica narrowed her eyes and looked at Shea. Her expression looked even more alluring. However, the words she said made Shea's heart sink. This woman spoke in a calm and unhurried tone. Bobov Dax, the #1 elite of the Lantis Kingdom's inspectorate. He is known as the #1 villain and the #1 troublemaker in the history of the Lantis Kingdom's inspectorate. He has the highest success rate in the history of the Lantis Kingdom. Of course. I heard that the files and documents of his troubles fill up a large cabinet. Shea, what I'm curious about is, how did such a legendary figure run over to your side to work for you? Could it be that your salary is higher than the Lantis Kingdom's? I heard that when Mr. Dax was in the Lantis Kingdom, even the king appreciated him a lot. He could enter and leave the palace as he pleased. Shea laughed and calmed down a little. Then, he pretended to be relaxed and said with a smile, "There is one thing you are wrong about, Monique. The amount of files he has caused is not just one cabinet, but 3 cabinets full of files. He told me all this himself, and he seems to be quite proud of it. I heard that he angered at least 6 of his superiors and made them leave." Shea wasn't too surprised that this woman suddenly mentioned Dax. Before coming here tonight, Dax had already expected this possibility when he talked with him. At that time, Dax said, "She must know what I am doing under her nose. Otherwise, she wouldn't be the legendary governor's wife. She may deliberately tell you, but it is a way to intimidate us. To deal with this kind of trick, the more you act like you don't care, the better." So, Shea pretended to be indifferent. "Monica, are you interested in that guy? Maybe I can bring him to the banquet tomorrow." "Of course I am." The governor's wife smiled. She narrowed her eyes and looked at Shea. "Mr. Dax is quite energetic. As your liaison adjutant, he rushed all the way to Husker City without resting for a single day. Today, he went to 6 shops and met with people from 4 chambers of commerce. He had 3 lunches with different people each time. I wish him good appetite." Finally, before evening, he went to the alley in the north of the city to look for women, 2 of them. Shea whistled and smiled. He always says that wine and women are the best medicine for a man to relieve fatigue. The governor's wife's smile was very reserved. She slowly raised her cup and took a sip of wine. Looking at the woman's almost perfect smile, Shea suddenly felt a sense of pressure in his heart. Every time he talked to this woman, she always seemed to have everything under control and had the upper hand. At this moment, Shea suddenly had an impulse in his heart. Ivan Godric. The name engraved at the bottom of the box was a strange message that General Lear had spent a great deal of effort to secretly pass to him. If he suddenly mentioned it in front of this woman without any concealment, would it make her perfect smile reveal a flaw? Would it make this woman feel a little surprised or worried? However, this impulse only flashed through his mind, and he immediately calmed down. He knew very well that since General Lear used such a special method to pass that name to him, it must be very important. Especially for this governor's wife, it might have some miraculous effect. It was still too early to throw it out. The conversation continued. It was as if the matter of Dax was just a small interlude. However, Shea was very clear in his heart. This woman had suddenly thrown out this topic, but he had shown enough calmness. The other party was not able to see the slightest bit of panic in his eyes. This woman must be very disappointed. "I need food." The governor's wife put down her wine glass and looked at Shea. Her tone became very frank. "I believe you must have analyzed our situation. The Besta military region needs food to sustain our consumption. At least by next year, this problem will become more acute. I can provide some." Shea smiled. "Of course there is a price. Military equipment and supplies." The governor's wife casually played with her slender fingers. "Food won't grow on its own. We don't have enough farmers. Most of the young adults have been added to the army. This is my problem. But for you, Moore County is a food-producing area, but it lacks iron ore. You want to equip your army, especially the powerful Roadrear cavalry. You need excellent weapons, armor, all of these are iron. You don't have these things, but the Besta military region has them. In exchange, I need your promise that at the beginning of spring next year, the Besta military region will receive enough support from you. We need to provide at least 3 months' worth of food for an army. Moreover, this is the standard for wartime. Shea suddenly smiled. Oh, these conditions, shouldn't you be the one to have your chief logistics officer come up with a better proposal? That was my original plan, but I have changed my mind. The woman suddenly smiled. Let me remind you, Shea, women are fickle creatures. All right. Shea grabbed a napkin and wiped his mouth. Then, he threw it on the table and stood up. At the beginning of spring next year, if Manninger's army moves north, I need Besta's friends to hold them back from the south. Of course, if Besta's friends make any military moves, please let me know. Although I don't have a lot of soldiers, I have a few thousand mounted soldiers to harass Manninger's retreat path and distract him. That should be possible. The conditions had been laid out on the table. The two of them smiled at each other across the table. Then, Shea took his leave. The governor's wife personally escorted him to the door. Then, she suddenly opened her mouth and said with a smile, Shea. What is it? Shea turned around. Your clothes. The governor's wife smiled charmingly and her eyes flashed. Before I met you and heard your story, I had always thought that you should be wearing a warrior's outfit or a divine armor, giving off an awe-inspiring aura. Truth be told, this type of luxurious aristocratic attire really does not suit you. This type of attire is too effeminate. Shea's heart skipped a beat and he smiled as well. Thank you for your praise. After a pause, he smiled as well. The perfume you are wearing tonight smells very good. It suits you very well. The governor's wife smiled even more happily. Shea laughed. What I mean is, the last time I saw you, your attire had always been very simple. Despite your noble status, I have never seen you wear any rings, earrings, necklaces or any other type of jewelry. However, tonight your perfume is very, very good. Thank you for your praise as well. The governor's wife smiled without batting an eyelid. After getting into the carriage, Shea finally let out a sigh of relief after seeing the garrison mansion far behind him. Dora's voice rang out from within his mind. You little brat, when did you learn how to flirt with women? Shea pursed his lips to the side. Some things do not need to be learned. Men are born with them, however. Did you really think I was flirting with her? Nonsense. What kind of man would rashly praise a woman's perfume in front of her? Dora's tone was somewhat impatient. The first sentence is the key. Shea leaned back on the seat cushion and narrowed his eyes. The first sentence is the key. You mean to say she never wears any jewelry on her body? She doesn't even wear any rings or necklaces. What does that mean? Shea gave a light smile and whispered. Dora, think about it carefully. Be it a ring or a necklace, they all have one thing in common. What is it? Without waiting for Dora to reply, Shea answered. Metal. Be it a ring or a necklace, they are all made of metal. This woman, from the first time he saw her, she didn't wear a single piece of metal jewelry or ornament. Originally, I did not think of this. However, during our conversation tonight, we suddenly brought up the lack of iron ore in Moore County. Speaking of iron, I was suddenly reminded. Shea's smile became even more sly. She does not wear anything metal on her body. I happen to know two people like this. One is Todoro, the other is my beloved foster mother, Lady Merlin, and the thing these two have in common is a magician. Dora's tone was solemn. You mean to say, this governor's wife is a magician? After Shea returned to his residence, he walked into the hall and saw Dax sitting there waiting for him. What a surprise! You drunkard, you actually did not go to sleep. Are you waiting for me to bring you some night snacks? Shea smiled as he walked over. However, this time Dax, who had always been frivolous, had a serious expression on his face. Even his eyes were somewhat solemn. He stood up and walked in front of Shea. He said in a low voice, "I think I found Ivan? Who does the name Godric belong to?" Shea immediately waved his hand and Dax shut his mouth. The two of them walked into the room one after the other. Then, Dax immediately walked around the window and the door. After listening for a while, he said in a low voice, "No one is eavesdropping, I'm sure." Shea seemed to have noticed Dax's seriousness. "Looks like your discovery is not ordinary." Dax seemed to smile, but his smile was not as frivolous as before. "Tonight, when I stayed here, I thought of what happened during the day. Suddenly, something inspired me. During the day, in order to cover my tracks, I ran to the north of the city. I know, you went to find women, and you found two at once," Shea said with a straight face. "Haha. Alcohol and women are the best medicine for men to get rid of exhaustion." Dax finally regained some of his vitality. He continued, "During the day, those two prostitutes complained to me that they were very envious of the life of a noble lady. Haha, at the time I said, oh, so what? Those two women said that noble ladies have their own personal chefs, tailors, and personal doctors. Then, I suddenly thought of this at night and it immediately reminded me. Before this, I was thinking in the wrong direction." He sat down in front of Shea. "Ivan? Godric, I always thought that this name belonged to someone important in the Besta military. For example, a general in the army, or an aide, or even an assassin or an intelligence agent who specializes in special missions. But I was wrong. In fact, this name has been mentioned in the information I've collected before. It's just that it's too inconspicuous." After a pause, Dax continued, "Boss, perhaps you don't understand the lives of noble ladies. Many of them have their own personal doctors, although these so-called doctors are not real doctors." "I don't understand." Shea shook his head. "To put it simply, women have their own secrets. For example, if a noble lady feels that her husband is starting to lose interest in her, she needs to find someone to concoct some special medicine. When it's time to increase the mood, haha. After all, this kind of thing is very private and can't be shown in public. Of course, she can't find a real doctor. If the news were to leak out, it would be disgraceful. Another example, if a noble lady feels that she is getting older and no longer beautiful, in order to regain her youth, she will find some special medicine to rub on her skin to maintain the elasticity and tightness of her skin. Or if she feels that a part of her body is getting fatter, she will find someone to prescribe a special medicine to make her vomit out the things she ate. Or, if an old noble lady wants to maintain her youth, for example, the wrinkles on her forehead, she will have someone use a knife to cut open the skin on her forehead and pull it up a bit. Haha, my lord, these things you don't know. You will never understand the price that women are willing to pay in order to become beautiful. This is women. Let's get to the point." Shea frowned. "What I mean is, the things I just said, when those noble ladies have these worries and needs, they will not go public with these matters that involve their own little secrets. Instead, they will find someone else to deal with them. At this time, there will always be a type of person beside those noble ladies. Private doctors. These private doctors are not real doctors. They may not need to treat people, but they definitely know how to concoct those special medicines and how to use those little tricks to change a woman's appearance." Shea sat up straight. "You mean this Ivan Godric? Is this Godric He is a private doctor. He is the personal doctor of this governor's wife. According to the records I have collected, he has been serving this governor's wife for over 6 years." Hearing that, Shea smiled bitterly. "A person who specializes in dealing with women's little secrets. Why did Lear give us such a person's name?" Is he trying to say that this beautiful governor's wife's beauty is actually fake? Did she use some kind of medicine concocted by this private doctor? Or is it, as you said, a cut was made on her forehead to tighten her skin? After saying that, Shea frowned. What kind of big deal is that? At most, it will just embarrass the governor's wife. Or should we find this fellow and investigate him? He is just a private doctor. He is not an important figure. Secretly capture him and interrogate him. No. Dax shook his head and said in a peculiar tone. Because this person is already dead. According to the records I have, he died 5 years ago. Shea. Dax smiled mysteriously. Thankfully, there is a record of this in the records I have collected. 5 years ago, there was a theft in the governor's mansion. This Ivan Godric is a private doctor who specializes in serving the noble ladies. He is also a gambler. It is said that he owes a lot of money. In the end, he took a risk and tried to steal some jewels from the governor's mansion. After a trial, he confessed that there were 3 other servants in the governor's mansion who helped him steal the jewels. In the end, the 4 of them were sentenced and thrown into prison. Then, 2 committed suicide to escape punishment, and 1 died while being whipped. As for Ivan, he was the one who was sentenced to death. After Ivan Godric was whipped, he was killed by the debt collectors. You know quite a lot, Shea said with a wry smile. Because the Lantis kingdom has been paying attention to the Besta military district and this powerful governor's wife for a long time, Dax said indifferently. Believe me, sir. After this year's series of events, the Lantis kingdom must have placed you on their list of important people. Well, the name of a private doctor who has been dead for 5 years. Why is this General Lear still being so mysterious and telling us about it as if it's a treasure? Shea touched his nose and frowned. Was it to silence him? Could it be that this fellow accidentally found out about some secret of the governor's mansion? Was he silenced? The other people who died with him must have encountered the same situation. As for the other fellows, you have asked the most important question. Dax's eyes flashed. The other 3 fellows who died, 2 of them were tailors and 1 was a shoemaker. Clothing and shoes maker. Shea smiled bitterly again. And a private pharmacist, Dax slowly said, assuming your guess is correct, this Ivan Godric might have accidentally found out about some secret of the governor's mansion. Godric accidentally discovered an important secret of the governor's office, and this secret might have something to do with the governor's wife. He and the other unlucky fellows were silenced because of this. Then, for General Lear to tell us this name, it means, since General Lear knows this name, he might have already found out about this secret. Moreover, this secret might have something to do with the confrontation between General Lear and the governor's wife. This secret might affect the governor's wife's rule. Shea suddenly had a thought and said, I might have discovered something today. After saying that, he recounted the conversation he had with the governor's wife about the perfume and jewels. She never wears jewels or metal jewels. I suspect that she is a magician. Due to the fact that metal is resistant to magic, almost all magicians do not wear metal jewels. After saying that, Shea's heart suddenly skipped a beat. At the same time, Dax also let out a low cry. The 2 of them looked at each other and said the same thing at the same time. Jewels, Dax quickly said. This governor's wife does not wear any jewels. But that poor private doctor died because he stole jewels. That does not make sense. We can be sure that this fellow was silenced for some reason. Shea rubbed his forehead. The tailor and shoemaker also died at the same time. He suddenly raised his head and looked at Dax. I suddenly have a very absurd idea. This governor's wife was born into a noble family. Logically speaking, how could a noble girl know magic? But the tailor and shoemaker, these people have a very important relationship. There is a saying, only you know if the shoe fits or not. But at the same time, whether the shoe fits or not, only the shoemaker knows. Dax's reaction was very fast. His expression became strange. You mean? Could it be this governor's wife is a fake? A female magician impersonated the original governor's wife. In order to keep her secret, she killed the closest private doctor. The tailor and shoemaker also had to be silenced. Because even if the appearance can be faked, the size of the body and feet are very difficult to fake. And the tailor and shoemaker who made the clothes for the governor's wife, these people will easily discover the secret of the impersonation. That's right. Shea jumped up. This is just my guess. Otherwise, how can you explain that an ordinary noble girl is actually a female magician? Not just anyone can be a magician. Magic is also not something that just anyone can learn. Dax laughed dryly. His expression became very strange. He looked at Shea and did not speak for a long time. Shea was a bit scared by his stare. He frowned and said, Why are you staring at me like that? Don't you think that my guess is very reasonable? Dax's smile had a strange taste. His eyes flashed. It's the exact opposite. Sir, your guess is simply too smart. But unfortunately, I'm afraid you've only guessed half of it. He took a deep breath. According to the information I have, the dead tailor and shoemaker, they didn't work for the governor's wife. Instead, they worked for Governor Yuri in the governor's mansion. They specialize in making men's clothing and boot. After saying this, Shea's expression suddenly changed. Impersonation. The impersonation isn't the governor's wife. You mean, the current Governor Yuri is the fake one? Coincidentally, according to the information I have, 5 years ago, Governor Yuri just happened to fall seriously ill. Although the information says that he survived. But according to the information we have, it seems that the real Governor Yuri died 5 years ago. The current one is a fake. Dax's tone was somewhat cold. Here's a 10,000-word chapter. Originally, I wrote 5,000 words in the middle of the night. Since it was going smoothly, I stayed up all night and wrote it all and posted it here, haha. To be continued. If you want to know the future, go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 439. GOR Chapter 416, A Reason, 6,000 words. This conjecture was somewhat bold and even absurd. Up until now, neither of them had any solid evidence. The only basis for this conjecture was the name of the private doctor who had died 5 years ago. However, Shea and Dax looked at each other for a long time. The more they thought about it, the more they felt that this possibility was infinitely high. If this conjecture was true, then it would explain everything. For example, why did Governor Yuri trust his wife to such an unbelievable degree? Was it only because of his love for her? There were many ways to love a woman. Could it be that he had to hand over his family's foundation, army and territory to his wife for that to be called love? Why was Governor Yuri supporting all of his wife's decisions over the years without any objection? If Governor Yuri was not an idiot, then there must be another reason. Additionally, from Dax's description and the information he had, Governor Yuri was not someone who would listen to a woman so easily when he was young. Governor Yuri, who was slightly younger, was also quite ambitious and decisive back then. Why did he become so mediocre after getting older? Why would he be willing to listen to a woman's breath? A puppet might be the answer to this question. Add to that the suspicious case from several years ago. The people who died were all Governor Yuri's closest servants, his tailor and shoemaker. These were all people who could easily expose the truth of a puppet. After all, a fake person could look very similar and could even use some methods to alter the appearance. Ivan Godric's private doctor, wasn't he a professional, who specialized in changing the appearance of those noble ladies? However, while a person's appearance could be deceiving, a person's figure and the size of their feet could not be hidden from their tailor and shoemaker. This was enough of a reason to silence them. Dax smiled bitterly and looked at Shea. Although it seems absurd, but after I carefully think about it, the more I think about it, the more likely it is. Let's assume that even if Governor Yuri loved his wife to the extreme, but after all these years, his wife has been busy with work. No matter how much a man loves his wife, if the wife is busy with work and has little time to care for the family, then no matter how good a relationship is, there will be problems. I am saying if I am the governor's wife and have obtained my husband's trust, I hold on to this power and I don't want to let go. Moreover, I know that the source of my power is my husband, then the right thing to do is to hold on to my husband's heart and have him continue to love me wholeheartedly. Only then can I stabilize my position. But look at this governor's wife. Although she has done a good job these years, she still has to spend a lot of time. She is always on this stage, busy everywhere. She can be called a diligent leader. Governor Yuri, I heard that he lives in the governor's mansion. Governor's wife. Governor's wife. Governor's wife. Now it seems that the explanation for this problem is very simple. That governor is just a fake puppet. So, we can make some changes to the Besta military district's drawbacks. Previously, we said that this woman's position was built on Governor Yuri's trust. But now it seems that this reason no longer exists. If our guess is correct, no one can shake the governor's wife's position. If the fake can be kept a secret, then this fake guy will definitely live for a long time. He will definitely not dare to go against this woman's wishes. If the officials of the Besta military district want the governor to change his mind, then it is absolutely impossible. Shea slowly said. Yes, but... Dax sighed. If all this is true, then, the two of them looked at each other and said the same name at the same time. Lear. At this moment, the two of them had the same thought in their minds. If this guess is true, then the governor's wife is really hiding such a huge secret. Then, what about Lear, who sent this name? Since he was able to send this name to Shea, then there is only one answer. Lear knows this secret. This Lear already knows that Governor Yuri is a fake puppet. This guy knows this secret. As the only person in the Besta military district who has the qualifications to fight for power with the governor's wife, as the true legal successor of the Yuri family, Lear is the one who should not know about this secret. Him knowing this secret is the most dangerous thing for that woman, the governor's wife. But he actually knows. And he even passed this secret to Shea through a name. Looks like this Lear thinks very highly of you. Dax smiled. He only gave you a name. Clearly, he thinks very highly of you. He thinks that as long as he gives you a name, you will be able to find the answer on your own. In this Lear's mind, you are a smart person. Shea smiled bitterly. Looking at Dax, he said meaningfully, perhaps he doesn't think highly of me, but you, as the most outstanding elite in the history of the Lantis Kingdom's Ministry of Supervision, he definitely knows about your background. He knows that a super spy like you is by my side. As long as he gives me a name, a super elite like you will be able to uncover the truth. In fact, he did it very smartly and beautifully. His goal has been achieved. He knows about your background, Dax. Don't forget, the method he used to pass this name to us is the standard method used by the Lantis Kingdom's intelligence personnel. Perhaps this itself is a hint. Dax immediately calmed down. This guy's face was serious. His eyes flashed, clearly his mind was working quickly. After a while, Dax took a deep breath. First, even if Lear really knows this secret, he definitely wouldn't dare to reveal it himself. Perhaps it's because he doesn't have any conclusive evidence. After all, this truth is too absurd. Even if he publicly claims that Governor Yuri is a fake, not many people will believe him. Others might even think that he's crazy for power. Moreover, this secret is a trump card. It's not the right time to use this trump card yet. In terms of power, Lear was now at an absolute disadvantage. That woman can tolerate his existence, but there is a limit to her tolerance. If he hastily uses this trump card, if the timing isn't right, it will lead to chaos. If the governor's wife is forced into a corner. Haha, please forgive me for using such words to describe a beautiful woman. Shea glanced at this guy. This bastard really can't change his habit of eating shit. Even at this time, he still can't help but joke. Once the governor's wife is forced into a corner, she can only act against Lear immediately. Lear's current strength is definitely not enough to contend against the governor's wife. He has no capital at all. So he is still waiting for an opportunity. That's why this trump card has always been carefully placed in his hands. Saying this, Dax looked at Shea. Perhaps, boss, you are the opportunity he has been waiting for. Dax suddenly became excited. What better opportunity than now? The Besta military district was originally calm, but the situation has changed. After leaving the Red Round Table Alliance, boss, you are now the most likely candidate to become their ally. Moreover, you have a lot of advantages. Although I don't like to praise you. But boss, you might not even realize how many advantages you have. You have the floor, the army, and most importantly, as long as the Byzantine Empire doesn't perish, you have a very big title. Commander of the Northern Military District. Saying this, Dax looked at Shea. Shea's face was a bit red. Both of them were well aware of what this title meant. This title guarantees you a very strong legal position. And now, with the participation of the Lantis, the possibility of the Byzantine Empire being destroyed can be eliminated. In the future, in the north, you are the best candidate with strength, righteousness, and the possibility of forming an alliance. Moreover, don't forget, boss, you are about to marry a princess of two countries. Don't look down on this. For someone of your status, this kind of marriage will add a lot of weight to your position. It can be said that if we win your support, it will also be very helpful to the Besta military district's internal situation. Lear, this guy, is very smart. He is smart because these days, he has been meeting with you and making friends with you, but he hasn't said a single word to rope you in. Because he is very self-aware, he knows his own status. He is not the person in charge of the Besta military district, so he doesn't have the qualifications to talk about forming an alliance with you, let alone talk about conditions. If he did that, then this guy doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. We can completely ignore this kind of idiot. But he is not stupid at all. The fact that he didn't try to rope you in is because he is smart. These days, he has only made friends with you, and made you have a good impression of him. In other words, he has made you face his existence and left you with a good impression. This has achieved his goal. And now he has passed on such an important secret to us. This is a smart and risky move. He directly passed on this name to us, tempting us to speculate the answer. But even if we have the answer, so what? We don't have any evidence. Maybe he has evidence in his hands, but we don't. It is even more impossible for us to reveal this matter, because there is no benefit for us. So, he telling us is the same as not telling us at all. For him, there is no loss, only benefit. He even secretly passed on this matter to us, leading us to this conclusion. He didn't do anything else to us. This move has two benefits. The first is to gain our trust. The second is a hint. He is hinting that when we form an alliance with the governor's wife, we must leave some leeway. We must not invest too much or too much. We must give ourselves a chance to turn back. Because this secret, this trump card, who knows when it will be thrown out? For that woman, it will be a fatal blow. Lear has such a deadly secret weapon in his hands. It's a hint to us that Lear is absolutely qualified to be our potential ally, and potential partner. His request is not high. He just wants us to know that we shouldn't close the door on him in a hurry. At the very least, we should leave him some possibility of cooperation. Just put him on the list and that's it. After saying so much in one breath, Dax let out a long sigh. Then, he leaned back on the chair and grabbed a kettle on the table. He gulped down a mouthful of water before letting out a comfortable sigh. Then, he looked at Shea with a solemn expression. This lyre is very powerful. You see, all he did was pass on a name to us and he managed to achieve so many goals, using such a small trick to achieve so many results. Boss, such a person is indeed qualified to be our partner. Shea thought for a while. Finally, the two of them came to a conclusion. Wait and see. On one hand, continue to cooperate with the governor's wife. But at the same time, they really have to leave some room for cooperation. As Dax said, they can't close the door too tightly. They have to leave some gap. Even if they close the door, they have to leave a window open. The news of Dax's arrival in Husk City was public. He came to Husk City as a special envoy and liaison adjutant summoned by Shea. Although the governor's wife had revealed Dax's background during the previous banquet, the smart woman continued to play dumb the next day. After the two sides confirmed the cooperation, the governor's wife and several corps members of the Besta military district had a formal meeting with Shea at the garrison residence the next day. In this meeting, this woman actually pretended as if she didn't know Dax at all, and even asked Shea to introduce his adjutant attendant to her in a serious manner. The cooperation was almost a done deal. Both sides' conditions were basically approved by each other. The Besta military district and Shea both needed foreign aid. At the same time, Shea needed military equipment. The Besta people needed food aid next year. Under these conditions, the rest was to discuss the details of the cooperation. Although Shea did not like bargaining, it was not as if he was not good at it. At least for a guy like him, who grew up in Wildfire Town, he was definitely not as straightforward and honest as he looked. After a few back-and-forth exchanges, the Besta people experienced the shamelessness of this Marshal Shea at the negotiating table. But what made Shea feel strange was that the Besta people showed a kind of incomprehensible generosity. Almost on the details that both sides had analyzed, the Besta people would try to argue in the beginning, but the beautiful governor's wife would often speak up at this time. With a cough or a glance, the Besta side would immediately give up their insistence. The negotiation went unexpectedly smoothly. With the Besta people making a lot of concessions, Shea gained a lot of benefit. He was surprised that the governor's wife would give in so easily. It was as if this woman was more anxious to quickly reach an agreement than he was. The negotiations between the two sides were completed in just one day. This speed could be said to be godly. But in the end, Shea still put forward an additional condition. I want someone. Shea sat in front of the table, but he didn't look at the Besta military officials sitting opposite him. Instead, he stared directly at the charming woman sitting at the side. This person must be given to me. The governor's wife smiled. She was dressed very formally today. Her black dress had been modified and cut, looking solemn and elegant. But the low collar in front of her chest revealed a tempting snow-white skin. During the negotiation, Shea couldn't control his gaze a few times. After a gentle smile, the woman met Shea's gaze and slowly said, I can't give you Gaia. This person is still very useful to us. Shea smiled. He knew the woman's intention. As the only remaining son of the Corsica military region, although Gaia was a scumbag, he still had some value as a signboard. At least, if they wanted to take over the Corsica military region's territory in the future, this signboard would show its value. Who cares about that trash? Shea said without hesitation. I'll give you Gaia. But I want that Sogol beside him. With that, Shea looked at the governor's wife, who was about to speak. He quickly said before she could, "Don't tell me that Sogol is dead. This guy is not of much use to you. Instead of rotting in a cell or secretly executing him, you might as well give him to me. Any information you want to know can be obtained from that trash Gaia. This Sogol must be given to me." The governor's wife smiled. She smiled brightly and seemed to be very happy. "It seems that in your eyes, this General Sogol is much more valuable than Gaia." The besta military personnel next to her desperately winked at the governor's wife, indicating that she should refuse the request. But the woman suddenly stood up and glanced at Shea. Her tone was flat, but there was no hesitation. "I'll give it to you." Shea saw Sogol in the prison of Husk City. This was the prison that was temporarily transformed from an old house next to the camp of the Husk City garrison. When he saw Sogol, the last general of the Corsica military did not look too good. His face was excessively pale, his beard was long, his hair was messy, and he was excessively thin. His eye sockets were deeply sunken. He was originally seriously injured, and it was clear that his injuries had not improved much over the past few days. After all, for a prisoner, the besta people would not give him any preferential treatment, let alone invite a doctor to treat his injuries. But Shea still saw what he expected from the man's eyes. This was something called perseverance. In this dark and cold cell, this man was like a wounded beast, quietly lurking in the corner, quietly licking his wounds and waiting for the right moment. "It looks like you're doing well." Shea stood at the door of the cell and looked at Sogol. This was a little strange, because it was obvious that Sogol's life was still far from doing well. On the table in the cell, there was only a pot of cold water and 2 pieces of cake that were almost moldy. A strong smell of rotting wounds came from Sogol's body. "It's not bad." The man's voice was hoarse. "It looks like you haven't given up. I'm very happy." Shea crossed his arms. "I'm not dead yet." Sogol glanced at Shea and said, "I thought I would die, but as long as I'm not dead and still have a breath left, I will not forget the oath I made." "Very good." Shea did not talk nonsense. He pulled out something from his bosom and threw it on the table with a bang. He looked at Sogol and said, "Come with me. Fight with me." When the thing fell on the table, the eyes of the man in the corner suddenly became fiery. His eyes stared at the thing on the table, and a kind of vitality suddenly radiated from him. Shea could clearly hear that the man's breathing had become rapid. After a moment of silence, Sogol said with a hoarse voice, "Give me a reason." "This book." Shea pointed at the thing he had thrown on the table. "The name's on it. You did not forget the oath you made. I also did not forget the story you told me. The Corsica military region is finished. You must accept this fact. Although I cannot help you restore the Corsica military region, you know better than me what kind of person your young master Gaia is. However, if you follow me, I can guarantee that you will have the opportunity to fulfill your promise to those people. The Odin people who invaded your homeland and the allies who betrayed you. Let these people who deserve to be punished get what they deserve. Let the people on this list rest in peace after death. Let their sacrifice be worthwhile." After saying that, Shea stared at the man in the corner and said, "How about it? Think about it carefully. You have nothing left. Even if you fail in the end, what is there to lose?" The man slowly stood up and took a step forward from the corner of the room. With this step, he stepped out from the dark corner. The ray of light from outside the iron window shone on his face, giving him a sharp feeling like a blade being unsheathed. "You are right. I have nothing to lose. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com to read more chapters. Support the author and support the legal reading. Chapter 441. GOR Chapter 417. Shocking news. After the matter of cooperation was settled, Shea didn't want to stay in Husker City for another day. Originally, he was forced to come out this time. Suddenly, there was such a disappearing drama. He was afraid that everyone in the family would go crazy. When he returned, that guy Green would crazily spit at him. Also, Adeline, who knows how many tears she shed. In the end, it's all that old bastard Oslin's fault. With Merlin as the leader, it seems that none of these old guys are normal. After bringing General Sogol of the Corsica military out of the prison, Shea immediately expressed his intention to leave to the governor's wife. The woman enthusiastically tried to persuade him to stay, but seeing that Shea was determined to leave, she gave up. I know very well that people of our status don't always have free time. After being away for so many days, I'm sure there's a lot of military affairs waiting for you to deal with in Moore City. When he bid farewell to the governor's wife, the woman smiled warmly and personally led the guards to escort Shea out of the city. Dax didn't go back with Shea. As Shea's adjutant, he had to stay in Husker City and be responsible for contacting the Besta military. Now that the two families were allies, it was only right to leave a liaison person behind. Dax himself didn't have any objections. In the past 2 days, he had been hanging out with Lear quite a bit. The two of them had practically become drinking buddies. It was said that when they were gambling, Lear would often send money to Dax's pocket. Regarding this matter, Shea and Dax were well aware that this was Lear's way of expressing goodwill. Naturally, they would gladly accept the money that was sent to their doorstep. Going back together with Shea was someone else. In order to express their sincerity for cooperation, as well as for the convenience of communication between the two sides in the future, the governor's wife sent a few of her subordinates to accompany Shea back to Moore County. From now on, these people will stay in Moore County and be responsible for the communication between the two families. Because from the Besta military district to the Moore region, there was still a region occupied by Odin Manninger in between. Therefore, the governor's wife assigned 50 valiant elite knights from her elite personal guards to escort Shea and others all the way back. Therefore, those who went with Shea were all from Besta's side. The only one who could truly be considered one of his own was Sogol of the Corsica military district. As for Sogol, he was still injured and couldn't ride a horse, so he could only ride in a carriage. The governor's wife personally escorted Shea out of the city until they were 10 miles away, but she still didn't seem to have any intention of leaving. Shea, on the other hand, looked at the woman riding beside him and felt a little embarrassed. He smiled and said, "Madam, no matter how far you escort me, there will always be a time to say goodbye. If we go any further, I'm afraid we'll be out of Husk's territory." "Monica, call me Monica." The woman glanced at Shea. Both of them were of noble status, so when they rode slowly, the night guards behind them deliberately stayed far away from them. The woman suddenly raised her horsewhip and pointed to a forest in the distance. She smiled and said, "Shea, do you see that forest? I even invited you to go hunting that day." Shea smiled. He didn't know why the woman suddenly brought up the matter of hunting that day. He smiled and said, "Yes, of course I remember." The governor's wife smiled sweetly and said, "Shea, since it's still early, are you interested in riding with me?" Shea immediately understood. They were surrounded by people, but the forest in the distance was quite secluded. It seemed that the governor's wife had something to tell him. He smiled and said, "That's fine. Before we leave, I'll listen to your teachings." The governor's wife let out a clear and melodious laugh, and then she urged her horse to raise her whip. With a long neigh, the mount boldly galloped out. Shea also smiled and forcefully squeezed his horse's belly, and then followed. The night guards in the back were originally going to follow, but a person who looked like the captain of the night guards stopped the attendants, and only ordered the team to stop on the road and wait. Shea and the governor's wife were both riding high-quality horses, especially the horse that the governor's wife was riding. It was red in color and looked very handsome. It was obviously the kind of horse that was hard to find. The two of them galloped at full speed and arrived at the forest in a short time. The governor's wife suddenly pulled on the reins and stopped outside the forest. She then jumped down from the horse and looked back at Shea. She didn't tie up the horse properly and just threw the reins away and walked into the forest. Shea followed behind. He didn't know what the woman was thinking, but he also jumped down from the horse and chased after her into the forest. As soon as he entered the forest, he saw that the governor's wife had stopped in front of him. She was standing next to a big tree with her back facing him. Her shoulders were as sharp as swords, and her beautiful back was covered in a red cloak. She looked like a ball of flame. But at this moment, this back seemed to have a sense of desolation. A soft sigh came, but the governor's wife didn't turn around. She just threw a sentence from afar. This sentence made Shea suddenly feel like he had fallen into an ice cellar. Ivan? Godric, well, this name, Shea, why are you suddenly so interested in this name? The moment Shea heard this sentence from the governor's wife, his whole body was already tense. His eyes instantly narrowed and he subconsciously looked around. At the same time, his hand quietly pressed on the hilt of the sword at his waist. The news was leaked? This woman, she knows that I've spied on her secret? The meaning of this name is likely to represent this woman's biggest and most fatal secret, and also her biggest weakness. Once I know, will she do something to me? At this moment, countless thoughts turned in Shea's mind. Finally, the governor's wife slowly turned around. Her expression was relaxed and calm, but in her excessively bright eyes, there seemed to be a hint of mockery. Her gaze swept over Shea's body, and passed by his hand which was quietly placed on the hilt of the sword at his waist. The mockery in her eyes became even stronger. Shea immediately loosened his grip on the sword hilt and laughed self-deprecatingly. He was still in someone else's territory, alone. If the other party was determined to kill him, what was so difficult about it? He simply let go of his thoughts and looked straight at the woman with his head held high. He frowned and said, "It seems that the people who served me these days are all your trusted subordinates. Do you know what I've done?" "Ha ha." The governor's wife smiled, but shook her head. "You're wrong, Shea. The people who were sent to serve you, I did not make any other arrangements. Oh, I admit that the two maids who were sent to serve you on the first day were arranged by me. But after that, there were no other special arrangements. The people who served you did not report any of your whereabouts or actions to me. Since I've decided to form an alliance with you, then to show my sincerity, why would I send people to spy on my ally?" Shea's mind spun quickly, and suddenly he understood. "Ah, that's right. You did not send people to spy on me, but there were people secretly spying on Lear. Lear sent me the box, and the people under him who handled these matters, there may be your spies." The governor's wife did not deny it and said coolly, "With such a hungry wolf lurking beside my bed, I have no choice but to be careful." After saying that, the beautiful woman narrowed her eyes and smiled happily. "Although I did not send people to spy on you, there are many who are secretly loyal to me among Lear's subordinate. The box he sent you, the person who carved the name on the bottom of the box, the person who used a special paint to cover it up, even the person who sent the box to you, all of them secretly received their salary from me. I have always given a high price, and I have never been stingy with my money. You know, in this world, money cannot buy everything, but it can buy most things. Money may not be able to buy loyalty, but it can buy betrayal." Faced with this situation, Shea made up his mind and said with a smile, "So, how do you plan to deal with me? Is there a group of hidden assassins outside this forest? As long as you give the signal, hundreds of warriors will rush in and tear me to pieces. Or is there an archer hidden in this forest? As soon as you whistle, an arrow will fly out and pierce my head? He 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 he." The governor's wife covered her mouth and laughed. "Shea, you really know how to joke. If I wanted to kill you, everyone in the city would be my subordinate. Why would I need to go through all this trouble? Pausing, she looked deeply at Shea and said, As for that name, that Lear naively thought that he had grasped a fatal weakness of mine, but he did not know that his thoughts were simply ridiculous. And that Lear fellow painstakingly came up with such a method to send you a box with the name of a man who had died a few years ago. Shea, do you really think that there is some unspeakable secret behind that name? Shea laughed dryly and did not say anything. What else could he do? Could he say to this woman, That's right, I guessed it, I guess that you have some unspeakable secret? You murdered your own husband, found someone to impersonate him, and even killed those who might discover your secret? Could he say that? Thus, after giving a few dry laughs, Shea closed his mouth and looked at this woman. Lear is quite smart, and he is also quite ambitious. The woman suddenly praised Lear, but then her tone changed as she looked at Shea. Shea, do you know why I chose to invite you here today before you leave, and why I want to say these things to you? Shea was not an idiot. After thinking about it for a moment, he understood the woman's intention. However, if he were to obediently open his mouth at a time like this, it would appear that he had been completely shocked by this woman. Thus, he remained silent and looked at the governor's wife with a calm expression. A look of surprise appeared on the governor's wife's face, seemingly surprised by Shea's calmness. Then, she smiled and said, I don't care what kind of absurd conjectures you have come up with because of that ridiculous name. It also made that Lear naive enough to think that he knows some great secret about me. However, that is just his wishful thinking. In truth, there is nothing that he can use against me. There is no way that he can threaten me. Shea, you can believe what I am saying. Of course, you can also choose not to believe it. In truth, it doesn't matter if you believe it or not. However, the reason why I invited you here and told you these things is very simple. You had better not have any illusions about that Lear fellow. Don't even think that you can choose him as a backup partner. In the Besta military district, there is only one person who can make decisions. There will only be one person in the future. That person is me, Monica. That Lear fellow is nothing more than a bait that I threw out. Although this bait is somewhat clever, it is still a bait after all. If there comes a day when I suddenly get tired of this game, I can erase this bait from this world at any time. After saying that, the woman's voice suddenly turned cold. As for that name, those meaningless conjectures, whether true or false, even if I tell you, you will not believe me. As I said earlier, I don't care if you believe me or not. I just want you to understand one thing. Everything about Lear is under my control. What he does, what he listens to, what he sees, even what he eats and drinks, all of that is under my control. If I want to, all I need to do is nod my head, and within a quarter of an hour, he will die in his bedroom. Shea, I just want you to understand that. As for the rest, I don't care. Shea was silent for a moment. Then, he raised his head and looked straight at the woman. He smiled faintly and said, I know very well, Monica. From the very beginning, the one who formed an alliance with me is you. We are now allies, aren't we? The governor's wife stared at Shea for a moment. Then, a beautiful smile blossomed out from her face. I am sorry, but I have to threaten you with such a childish and inferior conversation. The woman finally moved slowly toward Shea. When she was standing before Shea, a trace of bitterness could be seen within her smile. I know very well how inferior these words of threat are. However, Shea, we are now allies. Thus, you must understand that we are in the same boat. Being half-hearted will only bring harm to everyone. Additionally, due to a special circumstance, I am forced to say those words to you today, because I no longer have the time to continue probing each other, Shea. Although I like this game very much, I received a shocking piece of news early this morning. Due to this piece of news, I no longer have the time to continue probing each other and slowly build trust with you. The situation is urgent. I have to use this kind of inferior conversation to quickly dispel the estrangement and suspicion between us. Do you understand? This time, Shea was truly puzzled. You said you received a shocking piece of news? What is it? The governor's wife's expression changed. Her pair of beautiful eyebrows knitted together tightly. Then, word by word, she spat out a cold sentence from her seductive little mouth. Osgilla, city breached. Something happened during the weekend. I am outside and cannot come back. I owe you an update. I will make it up to you. Tomorrow, I will explode with 10,000 words for 3 consecutive days. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 442. GOR Chapter 418 Osgilla, Part 1, 10,000 Words. Even after many years, when looking back on this war, the mystery of Osgilla's fall still perplexes countless military historians. Because at that time, the rebel army's morale was already declining. The war against Osgilla lasted from spring all the way to winter, spanning over half a year. Both the attackers and the defenders were exhausted. With the addition of Lantis's people, the rebel army was already in chaos. At that time, the situation was leaning towards the Empire's side. But at that time, the supposedly impregnable city of Osgilla was actually breached by the rebel army. This was simply a miracle, a huge joke played by the heavens, an inconceivable miracle. However, what no one knew was that the occurrence of any so-called miracle was actually built on a certain opportunity and prerequisites. Let us temporarily turn back time to a few days before Osgilla's fall. At this time, in the northern city of Husk, Shea and Dax were secretly discussing how to deal with the beautiful governor's wife of the Besta military district. Almost at the same time, in Osgilla, a young man was also facing a huge problem. Gur was in a dilemma. As the nephew of General Span, who was one of the commanders of the defending army, General Span was an important general of the Empire. Especially when the Empire was about to collapse, as a pillar of the defense of Osgeria, his position in the army was below General Aderix. Everyone knew that as long as the imperial family could win this war, then this General Span who had worked so hard and performed so many meritorious deeds would definitely be used by the Emperor. Originally, he was just a garrison general in the Empire. In a place like the Empire where the nobles gathered, a small garrison general was just a small character in the eyes of the nobles who sat high above the clouds. Even in the circle of nobles of the Empire's younger generation, Gur was just a small character. But this war had changed everything. In times of chaos, whoever controls the army will have the most power. Now that the rebel army has been besieging the city for several months, the garrison general of the Empire is that unremarkable General Span. And this General Span has gained the trust of both the old and new emperors. Even if Adrik, the publicly recognized #1 general in the army, returned to the Empire with reinforcements, he was immediately appointed as the garrison general of the Empire. However, General Span's position in the hearts of the Empire's royal family did not drop. General Span was now appointed as the deputy commander of the Empire's garrison, his position only below that of Adrik. Almost half of the garrison troops in the Empire were under Span's command. One must know that in the current situation of the Empire, the 6th and 7th Legions, which were originally stationed outside, were said to have been destroyed in the north. The most powerful 13th Division, the Roadrear Cavalry, was also destroyed. Among the remaining armies, the 2nd and 9th Corps had been rebuilt after the last war with Odin, and they now had no more than 20,000 people. As for the main fighting force in the Empire, it was the original 20,000-plus soldiers of the Imperial City Guard. They were the old troops that Span had always commanded. As for the 10 to 20,000 men that Audiobook brought back, they were actually just local garrisons that had been pieced together from the south. In terms of quality, they were far inferior to the royal city guards. If one were to carefully make a comparison, amongst all the capable armies that the Empire could muster, Span, who was previously an unremarkable character, suddenly shone with boundless radiance. This was because almost half of the most elite troops loyal to the Empire were his old subordinates, the Imperial City Guards, which he had personally brought up. Even the Imperial Guards of the Empire had some unclear relationship with Span. The Empire's usual practice was to select elites from the Imperial City Guard with good family backgrounds to fill the ranks of the Imperial Guards. In the current Imperial Guards, many of them were transferred over from the Imperial City Guard. Span had commanded the Royal Guards for more than 8 years, and many of the current Royal Guards used to be Span's former subordinate. In the army, this relationship between old subordinates was often valued by everyone. It could even be said that at least in the current army, Span's prestige was not lower than Audric's. In addition, he had pledged his life to protect the imperial city. Before Audric returned with his troops, Span was the one who supported the defense of the imperial city. Such a contribution, no matter how much he was rewarded, it would not be excessive. At this moment, the Empire's generals were few and far between. Although Audric was publicly recognized as the #1 general, ever since he was promoted to Minister of Military Affairs, it could be considered as a civilian. In the Empire's usual practice, there had never been a Minister of Military Affairs who directly commanded an army. Therefore, although Audric had the reputation of being a general, he did not have a direct army under his command. Ruhr's reputation had finally been restored. This general, who was previously recognized as only good at escaping and protecting himself, had led the Rodria cavalry to fight a fierce siege that night. He had led less than 10,000 Rodria cavalry to forcefully charge into the rebel army's camp and fought a fierce battle for the entire night. Blood flowed like rivers and corpses piled up like a sea of blood. 10,000 Rodria cavalry fought with all their might, but this man who was previously thought to be a coward did not back down at all. In the end, he forcefully escorted the new emperor into the city to be crowned. Ruhr's other abilities aside, at the very least, no one dared to use the word coward on him anymore. As for the other generals in the Empire's army, the generals of the 2nd and 9th Divisions were Sophia and Butler. They were both former emblem regimental-level generals, and were Audric's direct subordinate. Even those who were slow in politics would at least understand one thing. Audric was already the #1 general in the Empire's army. As the Minister of Military Affairs, many of the generals in the Empire's army were his direct subordinate. The so-called Audric faction had already begun to take shape. Therefore, the emperor and the other civil officials would definitely not promote Audric's direct subordinate. At the very least, Sophia and Butler, the two legitimate direct subordinates of Audric, would have to sit firmly in their current positions for a long period of time without any chance for promotion. Then, after thinking about it, the only one who could still be put on the table was Span. Moreover, this Span had already proven his ability and loyalty to the Empire in this war. He wasn't Audric's direct subordinate. If he was promoted, he would be able to contend against Audric in terms of military prestige. At the same time, he would be able to achieve a situation where Audric's faction was the only one in the Empire. After this war, even if General Span didn't want to achieve meteoric success, the entire Empire wouldn't agree to it. At the very least, he wouldn't be able to escape the position of Vice Minister of Military Affairs. Who knows, he might even be able to obtain the title of Marquis. Regardless of status or authority, he would be able to stand tall among the top 5 nobles in the Empire. Such a popular and rising figure who could overturn the Empire, and everyone knew that General Span didn't have a son. Nigel, a former minor character in the Empire's aristocratic circle, a lackey-like fellow, had become the sole successor of General Span. He had become the sole successor of that new and powerful faction. At this very moment, those who were trying to curry favor with General Span were like carps crossing the river. However, there were also plenty of people who were trying to flatter young General Nigel. If such a situation were to happen to the previous hedonistic son of rich parents Nigel, this fellow would probably wake up laughing in his dreams. However, the current Nigel had turned over a new leaf. That night, under the leadership of that mysterious expert from his family, Mr. Knight Forest, he had broken through the encampment and returned to the city. Thereafter, he served in the Empire's army and became a righteous person. He was originally courageous and powerful. After becoming a general, his talent wasn't bad either. After straightening out his attitude, he bravely fought in the Empire's army. These days, he had managed to accumulate some military merit. It was as though a piece of stubborn iron had been thrown into the furnace of war and the army. Finally, it was tempered into steel and the essence was extracted to become a true young hero. However, no matter what, his family background was there. Although he had started from the bottom in the Empire's army as a soldier, he was promoted from a small squad leader to a small flag officer. Along the way, he relied on his military merits and the heads of the rebel soldiers he had killed to climb up the rank. This could be considered as a genuine merit and was not exaggerated. During the battles, he was indeed brave and courageous. Despite being injured many times, he never retreated. However, he was after all General Span's nephew. He was the sole successor of General Span. Therefore, within the Empire's army, he naturally received care from the top and bottom of the hierarchy. At the very least, in just 2 months' time, he was promoted from a soldier to an adjutant. This speed of promotion was simply astonishing. Even during the war, Nigel had personally chopped off the heads of many of the rebel soldiers who were besieging the city. He had also sustained injuries many times and was unable to leave the front lines. However, during the battles, there were naturally many others who could do this other than Nigel. The rebel army had besieged the city for several months. Which of the defenders did not vow to fight to the death? Which of them did not sustain injuries? However, with Nigel's family background, the speed of his promotion was much faster than others. The Empire had been established for thousands of years. Most of the younger generation of the nobles were those who indulged in sensual pleasures. There was rarely a person like Nigel who was able to perform his duty as a soldier. He was worthy of being praised to the heavens. These days, Nigel was still on guard duty on the city walls. He had been promoted to a deputy battalion commander. However, that was equivalent to a battalion commander. The battalion commander of his battalion had been seriously injured during the battle and had retired to recuperate. That battalion commander had lost an arm during the battle and had become a cripple. Even after recuperating, that battalion commander would have to retire from the army or transfer to a civilian position. It was also during that battle that Nigel was promoted to a deputy battalion commander. However, the upper echelons of the military had intentionally or unintentionally not sent anyone to fill the position of battalion commander. Without a battalion commander, Nigel would naturally become the de facto leader of the army. Now, Nigel only held the title of deputy battalion commander. However, he commanded a battalion of nearly 300 men. The continuous battle had caused the casualties of the defenders in the city to be extremely high. However, when the limited reserve forces were used to replenish the various battalions, the upper echelons also gave Nigel's battalion special preferential treatment. The replenishment of manpower and material resources was also the heaviest. Other battalions could only have 100 or 200 men at most after being replenished. Only Nigel's battalion was able to maintain a full complement of 300 men. This preferential treatment was also the intention of the upper echelons of the military to cultivate Nigel. They gave him as much manpower and material resources as possible so that this future young general could have more troops under his command and achieve more military merit. At the same time, the more troops under his command, the more safety of this future young general could be ensured during the battle. Of course, all these various preferential treatments were not considered wrong by the upper echelons of the military. Instead, they felt that it was a matter of course. In the city defense in the southwest of the imperial capital, a block below the city wall had been completely requisitioned after the war. All the houses and buildings were requisitioned for the storage of ordnance, the settlement of wounded soldiers, the logistics operation, and the command center. Among them, some houses were arranged in some places for the garrison soldiers who were rotated out to rest. Although Nigel was only a low-ranking officer of the battalion level, he was also given a single room to rest. This preferential treatment was naturally due to his family background. When Nigel was fighting on the city wall, he was brave enough. He had also gone through life and death with the soldiers. Even if arrows were used instead of swords and axes, Nigel would not frown when he blocked the swords for his comrades in the chaotic battle. However, after going down the city wall, he did not refuse this single room to rest. After all, no matter how willing he was to share the joys and sorrows of the soldiers, Nigel, who was born in a noble family, had a deep-rooted concept of hierarchy in his ideology. In his view, he was brave enough to kill the enemy and was not afraid of death. During the war, standing on the front line with the soldiers was enough. As for sleeping with the soldiers after the war, there was no need for that. On the contrary, it would seem pretentious. Although his way of thinking was not desirable, among the young nobles in the imperial capital, to be able to do as he did was already considered a first-class talent. Previously, when the rebel army attacked the city fiercely and the battle was in a stalemate, the rebel army attacked day and night without rest. Nigel and the soldiers also guarded the city wall day and night. Even if they were tired and sleepy, they would lean against the wall and rest for a while with their weapons. Once the war drums were beaten, they would immediately jump up with their weapons and rush to the enemy who had rushed up the city wall. However, these days, the rebel army's offensive seemed to be getting weaker and weaker. A few days ago, they were still attacking 2 or 3 times a day. However, these days, they only attacked once a day lazily, and each time, they would only choose a few points to attack. On the other hand, the section of the city wall where N.I. Guer's battalion was located had not seen any fighting for the past 3 days. It was only yesterday when the rebel army attacked another city gate, and N.I. Guer was ordered to send out a troop to reinforce them. It was rare for him to be able to relax and have a good night's sleep. Only then did Nigel regain some of his energy. A few days ago, the days of licking blood on the edge of the blade had made him numb. After relaxing for a few days, the entire city seemed to be brimming with the joy of victory. The news of Lantis' participation in the war had already spread throughout the city. At the port of Catania, Lantis' fleet had already docked and an army regiment had already landed. This was equivalent to stabbing a sharp dagger into the rebel army's back. At the same time, it was said that Lantis had several other regiments that were gathering and were about to be transported by their powerful navy to the southern ports. When the time comes, with so many daggers stabbing into the rebel army's back, is the end of the rebel army still far away? This victory of the war has finally allowed us to endure. This kind of relaxation before victory had even permeated the officials. Some aristocratic families had even secretly held some celebratory banquets these days. Although all supplies were under the control of the rationing system during the war, the empire had been established for thousands of years. However, the empire had been established for thousands of years, and the influence of these nobles had long penetrated into every corner. Although there was a prohibition on alcohol, those powerful nobles were still able to get their hands on wine. Although there was a food rationing system, those powerful nobles were still able to get their hands on delicious delicacies. This relaxed atmosphere caused General Span and Adrik to feel uneasy. Under their joint efforts, at least the atmosphere in the army remained tense. As for those nobles in the city, they can do whatever they want. Although Adrik knew that these people were violating the ban, it was not appropriate for him to intervene. After all, these nobles had been cooperating with him for the past 6 months. Many aristocratic families had contributed their private soldiers and servants to strengthen the army's back forces. Some had also contributed gold coins to strengthen the army. To be able to do so was already a sign of their loyalty to the empire. Now that this war was about to be over, if they want to be happy, then let them be happy. After resting for 2 days, Nigger received a total of 18 invitations to banquets. Those fellows could not invite his uncle and instead, they unanimously targeted him. If it was in the past, Nigger would naturally be more than happy to suddenly become so popular. But now, after experiencing this war, after experiencing those bloody battles, after those days of dancing on the blade, Nigger had become a completely different person. The original hedonistic son had unknowingly grown into a man. He tore down all these invitations. What a joke! The rebel army outside the city has yet to retreat. Who knows, they might attack the city again at any time. As a garrison officer, how can I attend some bullshit banquet? These fellows are really messing around. Nigger had already thought it through. Tonight, he would go to the logistics department and use his face to get some meat back. Then, he would send it back to his camp and stay with his soldiers. His uncle had once taught him that if he wanted to give his life to his soldiers, he had to be considerate of his subordinate. Generally speaking, the empire's generals were divided into 2 types. One type was the generals who came from the grassroots. For example, Adrik and the others were all graduates from a military academy. They came from the lower class and could really mingle with the lower class soldiers in the army. They ate and drank together and even slept together. The other type was the generals who came from aristocratic families. For example, Nigger. Although he could live and die with his soldiers in battle and had the courage to sacrifice himself, the aristocratic hierarchy in his bones would not change. He would still maintain his aristocratic status and enjoy some preferential treatment. Sleeping together with his soldiers was something that Nigger could not do. However, he could use his status to fight for all the benefits for his army. Nigger had already made up his mind. He tore up the remaining invitations and was about to go out. But when he was tearing up the last one, his eyes suddenly drifted over the name on the invitation. His hand suddenly stiffened and his movements stopped. This was not an invitation to a banquet, but just an invitation to a private party. What surprised Nigger was that the names on the invitation card were Gulli, Masha, Jerry, Martha, Bidardo, plus himself. The 4 talents of Wangqing. Thinking of the absurd days when he was young, the corners of Nigger's mouth twitched, revealing a wry smile. Everyone always had some real friends. The other 3 people in the 4 talents of Wangqing were Nigger's friends. He had been fighting in the army for the past few days, but he had almost forgotten about these former friends. Jerry, Bidardo, alas, and Martha. A very cliché reason. When the so-called 4 talents of Wangqing gathered together, it was mostly because of the only female member of the 4 talents, Miss Martha, who was known as the new goddess of the night. Among the 4 youngsters, Nigger and Jerry were both nobles, but they all happened to adore the beautiful Miss Martha. Several young people who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth thought that after learning some skills from the expert guards in their family, and under the deliberate flattery of their subordinates, they really became complacent and began to dream of becoming a master. However, an Aiguran young master Jerry had always been in love with Ma Sha. Unfortunately, in the past, Miss Martha obviously favored young Master Jerry, who was handsome and had a better family background than himself. As for himself, among the four people, he was just a supporting role with a tall and bull-like figure. In the past, Nigger could only silently accept this situation. After all, Jerry's family background was much stronger than his. He was the son of a minister, while he was just the nephew of a general. In a place like the imperial capital, there were almost a handful of people with the title of general. His uncle was also a person who did not like to fight for power and profit. He just guarded the position of the city guard and never seemed to have any ambition. Jerry was handsome and tall, but not like him, who looked like a bull-like figure and did not seem to have the slightest sense of romance. The status and talents of the two people were very different. Nigger could only silently serve as a foil. He watched the girl he adored and his friend talking and laughing. But now, today, when he received this invitation, Nigger suddenly had an unprecedented impulse in his heart. Perhaps, today, he was already different? He hesitated for a moment. Anyway, it was just a small gathering of a few people, and it was his time to rest. He would come back soon and would not delay anything. Moreover, he had not seen Martha for many days. His originally calm heart was stimulated by this invitation, and suddenly rippled and could no longer be calm. He hurriedly changed into a clean set of clothes, took the horse and went out for the appointment. The gathering was at a tavern that they used to go to the most. When Nigger arrived, as usual, their attendants had already booked the tavern. There were only 5 or 6 people who participated in this gathering. The 4 talents of King City were all present. In addition, there were 2 or 3 small characters who were not very influential in the circle of young nobles. Negur was the last one to arrive. When he entered the door, he saw Jerry and Martha sitting together and chatting intimately. That young Master Jerry was still as handsome and confident as before. On the table was that magnificent silver cross sword. However, that Miss Martha did not carry her signature, Bow of the Night Goddess, on her back. When Nigger entered the door, the people inside immediately cheered together. A few small characters ran to greet him and flattered him. This made Nigger somewhat uncomfortable. In the past, in this small circle, only Jerry would receive such treatment. As for himself, in the past he also mixed in with these people and flattered Jerry. However, what made Nigger surprised was that when Miss Martha saw him enter, she immediately stood up and left Jerry, who was chatting intimately, and walked towards him in large strides. Nigger, you finally came. Our 4 talents of King City is finally here. Tonight, Martha didn't wear any warrior attire like before. Instead, she resumed the attire of a noble girl. Her hair was combed and draped behind her head. Her long skirt trailed on the ground. She leisurely walked towards Nichel. Nichel immediately smelled a faint fragrance entering his nose. Martha appeared to be very happy. She actually came up and gave Nigger a hug. Although they had a good relationship in the past, Martha had never hugged him before. At this moment, this warm and soft body in his embrace. Although it was only for a short moment, Nigger could not help but be absent-minded for a moment. He even forgot to savor the ecstasy. After that, Massa personally held Nigger's hand and pulled him to the front of the table to sit next to her. At this time, Nigger and Jerry met face to face. This young Master Jerry still had a somewhat arrogant smile on his face. He nodded to Nigger and said, "You brute, you are late again. In a while, you will be punished to drink a bucket of wine first." Such frivolous words, if it was in the past, Nigger would just laugh embarrassedly and say a few self-deprecating words. Afterwards, when he was punished to drink, he would obediently pour himself a few cups of wine. But today, when Jerry threw these words at him, Nigger suddenly realized that at this moment, he could no longer lower himself to flatter this young Master Jerry. After experiencing the true test of life and death, after experiencing the mountain of corpses and the sea of blood on the city wall, after experiencing personally chopping off the enemy's head with a sharp long sword. At this moment, Nigger naturally had his own pride in his heart. Lao Tzu had even broken through the rebel army's camp. How many rebel armies' heads had been chopped off by Lao Tzu? At the critical moment of life and death, Lao Tzu didn't even frown. How could such a spoiled brat have the qualifications to make Lao Tzu bow his head in front of you? Nigger just smiled stiffly and nodded indifferently before sitting down. Seeing Martha intimately holding Nigger's arm, even after sitting down, she didn't seem to have any intention of letting go. Instead, she seemed to have quietly moved closer to Nigger's side. Young Master Jerry's face turned green. The corners of his mouth twitched, but in the end, he didn't say a word. This gathering was still going on in the same manner as the countless gatherings in the past. However, Nigger, who was sitting in the middle, faintly gave birth to a feeling of being incompatible with this atmosphere. These fellows were still talking about those interesting stories and gossips in the aristocratic circle. For example, a certain marquis's mistress secretly hooked up with someone else. For example, a certain noble lady who seemed to be reserved was actually a promiscuous slut. A certain noble young master who seemed to be strong was actually a useless trash in bed. Nigger, who was sitting in the middle, only felt bored. The others were talking in high spirits, but he didn't say a word. The only thing that made him pleasantly surprised was the change in Martha's attitude towards him. In the past, Miss Martha's beauty had moved his heart, but in this small circle, he was just a small character. Even in the small group of the 4 talents of the King's City, Jerry was the brilliant leader, Martha was the apple of everyone's eye, and even that Bidardo had at least the halo of a mage. Only he, who was as big as a bull, had always been the target of everyone's teasing. He was just a clown who amused everyone. Even Martha, whom he adored, rarely looked him in the eye. Most people thought that Martha and Jerry were a couple. But tonight, Martha's attitude towards him was almost warm. She kept asking him to drink. Seeing that he was bored, Martha even took the initiative to come over and talk to him to relieve his boredom. To be honest, this kind of treatment made Nigger feel flattered. Although he might not be interested in those topics that Martha talked about, but for a young man like him, to see a beautiful girl that he had adored for many years smiling sweetly in front of him, and occasionally looking at him, intentionally or unintentionally, with such a close distance to see the other's flower-like beautiful smiling face and the faint fragrance on her body, this was enough to make Nigger intoxicated. Moreover, thinking about it carefully, the way Martha looked at him tonight, there were a few times that it seemed as if there was a faint taste that made him excited. This kind of gaze, in the past, Martha would only reveal it when looking at Jerry, but now it was directed at him. Even as they talked, this gathering seemed to have turned into others talking about them, while Nigger and Martha were whispering to each other at the side, clearly separated. Nigger didn't know how much wine he had drunk, but he suddenly realized that Martha was sitting close to him. Almost half of that warm and soft body was leaning on his arm. Seeing that beautiful face so close to him, and the taste in those eyes, the feeling of wanting to say something, and those watery eyes almost dripping with water, even if Nigger was a fool, he should have understood the girl's thoughts. It was just that this kind of surprise, which he had never thought of, suddenly appeared in front of him, making Nigger somewhat at a loss. At this moment, a low whistling sound came from outside. Nigger had been in the army for so many days, so he immediately recognized that this was the whistle made by the cavalry when they were on the move. Hearing this familiar military sound, he sobered up a little. He immediately sat up straight and coughed. "It's late, I have to go back to the camp." After saying that, he gritted his teeth and stood up. Although he was resting tonight, ever since he became a battalion officer, his uncle had taught him that as an officer, he had to empathize with the soldiers, and he had to patrol the camp every night. Although this was not his duty, it was only by doing so, over the years, he could make the soldiers truly loyal to him, and he couldn't neglect them for even a day. Since Enchantment was determined to be a capable person, he naturally followed his uncle's instructions. These days when he was serving as an officer, whether it was during wartime or resting, he would only rest after all the soldiers had fallen asleep. Even when he was resting, he would still patrol his subordinates and only leave when he saw that all the soldiers were resting peacefully. This practice had indeed greatly improved his position in the hearts of the soldiers. At this moment, when he heard the whistle of the patrolling soldiers outside, he immediately recognized that it was already late. If he rushed back now, he could still make it in time to patrol the camp. If he was late, he wouldn't be able to make it back before the soldiers fell asleep. Nigger got up and hurriedly bid farewell. Naturally, the people beside him tried their best to persuade him to stay, but everyone felt that Nigger was out of place tonight. Although their words were warm, they lost some sincerity. Nigger wholeheartedly wanted to return to the camp, so how could he be willing to stay? He was about to leave, and everyone could only send him out. However, Massa purposely asked everyone to stay, and personally sent Nigger out. Just before Nigger got on the horse, Massa even held Nigger's hand. At this moment, this girl simply let go of her previous restraint, and her eyes were already filled with charm. Her slender hand gently pulled Nigger's clothes, and she suddenly lowered her voice and said softly, "Nigger, you are serving in the army, so you have to take care of yourself. If something happens to you, everyone will be sad for you. I will be even more sad, do you understand?" Nigger only felt that his heart was bursting with joy. Looking at the girl in front of him, whom he had admired for many days, actually revealing her feelings, he only felt dizzy. How could he have other thoughts? However, Massa suddenly took a step forward and leaned over to Nigger's tall side. Like a little bird, she stuck close to him and gently kissed Nigger's cheek. Then, she let go of Nigger, smiled lightly, and turned around to run into the tavern. Nigger only felt that his soul had turned upside down. He stood there in a daze for a long time before he reacted. He immediately had an impulse to go back with Massa, but after all, he was worried about the military affairs. Finally, he clenched his teeth, turned around, and left. Along the way, Nigger's heart was extremely happy. He only felt that his body was a little lighter, and he spurred the horse to gallop. Being blown by the night wind, his mind also became a little clearer. Although this young man was trapped in the web of love, he was after all not a fool. He could faintly guess why Massa's attitude towards him had changed. It was just that a young man like him did not have much experience in relationships. Massa was the girl he had admired for many years. At this moment, he could not be more happy to have her favor. Why would he care about anything else? As for whether or not Martha's attitude changed because of his uncle's sudden promotion, for this young man, it didn't seem to be that important. He even naively thought in his heart, even if what she cares about is my family background, if I work hard in the future, I will definitely have some achievements. Two people together, after a long time, there will eventually be true feelings. It's not that big of a problem. As long as I can be with her, it is something that I wish for even in my dreams. With joy in his heart, Nigger returned to his residence, and then personally inspected his subordinates who were resting. He even took advantage of his high spirits, and went up the city wall to inspect again. When he returned to his resting place under the city wall, he could not fall asleep for a long time. Like every young man who had just entered the field of love, he lay on the bed, tossing and turning, but his mind was only fantasizing about all kinds of happy scenes after he and Massa were together in the future. It was not until the latter half of the night that he began to feel a little sleepy. Suddenly, he heard someone outside, but it was his personal guard. "Sir, someone is looking for you." Nigger immediately turned over and sat up. He was in a daze, having a beautiful dream. In the dream, he was swimming hand in hand with Massa. Just when they were deeply in love, he was woken up by someone. He immediately became a little angry and shouted in a low voice, "This is an important place in the military. Who comes to visit at night? Don't you know the rules?" The personal guard outside whispered back, "We couldn't stop him." The other party said that he is your friend and has something important to tell you. Nigger was puzzled, but he still turned over and got out of bed, put on his coat and came out. The entire street under the city had been designated as a military-restricted area. He followed the personal guard all the way to the outside of the street. Outside the cordon of the soldiers on sentry duty, a noble's carriage was parked there. A tall and straight figure stood quietly beside the carriage under the night sky. It was only when Nigger came over that the person turned around. The moonlight shone on the person's face, which made Nigger a little surprised. It was Jerry, the former leader of the 4 talents of King's City, young Master Jerry. Although Nigger used to be just a small follower of Jerry, and Jerry always made fun of him, Nigger had to admit that Jerry was one of his few friends. At least in the circle of young nobles in the capital, he used to be a small character and was bullied a lot. There were quite a few times when Jerry came to take care of him. Moreover, Massa was interested in him before, but today Massa publicly got together with him. As for Gully, an Aigueur felt a sense of guilt in his heart. He had snatched his friend's woman. This kind of action seemed to be a little disgraceful. Jerry came to visit in the middle of the night. Could it be that he was looking for revenge? This is today's 10,000 words. Tomorrow there will be 10,000 more. It will be like this for 3 consecutive days. Consider it as making up for the debt from the previous weekend. To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.